Welcome back to Cosmic Wand. Today's adventure. Harry was ranked the weakest in his year until a voice said, "Level CAP removed, ascend without limit." If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now let's begin. Chapter 1. The floor of the gauge looked like a cauldron that had given up on soup and decided to become a god. It stood on a dais in the center of the great hall, taller than Hagrid, wrought in black iron and silver wire, and it hummed in a register that lived behind the teeth rather than in the ears. Every September the whole school filed in to watch it work. Every September the same thing happened, which was that the rich got richer and the measured stayed measured, and the only suspense was in the decimal places. Harry Potter sat at the end of the Gryffindor bench and ran the arithmetic he had been running all week, which went, there were 280 students at Hogwarts, and at some point in the next hour every single one of them would learn his number, and his number was going to be small. "You're doing the thing," Ron said beside him. "What thing?" "The thing where you go quiet and your face turns into a wall. You did it before the flying exam. You did it before that potions thing." "This is different." "How?" "In flying I had a chance." The gauge let out a low tolling note, the kind of sound a bell makes when it is thinking about ringing, and the hall went still. Up on the dais, Professor Sinistra stepped forward with the register, a scroll that unrolled itself and kept unrolling because it contained the standing of every witch and wizard who had ever sat the reading, going back 400 years, sorted from highest ceiling to lowest. Somewhere near the bottom of that scroll there was a blank line waiting for Harry, the way a hole in the ground waits for whatever falls in it. Here was the thing they taught you in first year, the thing they engraved over the entrance to the index office, the thing that every adult repeated with the serene confidence of people stating that water is wet. A wizard's ceiling is fixed at birth. You could train, you could study, you could grind your knuckles to the bone over a single charm for a decade. And all of that effort moved you toward your ceiling, closer and closer, an asymptote crawling up to a line it would never cross because the line was the line. Some people were born with their ceiling in the clouds, some were born with it about waist high. The gauge simply told you where the line was so you would stop wasting everyone's time pretending it might be somewhere else. It was, Harry thought, an admirably honest system. It was honest the way a slap is honest. "Roll, Cassian," Sinistra read, and the hall did the thing it always did, which was lean. Cassian Roll rose from the Slytherin bench without hurry. He was tall and pale and unbothered, and he moved through the world like a person who had read the ending of the book and found it agreeable. He stepped onto the dais. He put his hand flat against the iron flank of the gauge. The humming climbed and kept climbing, past the register of teeth and into the register of bone, and the silver wire began to glow, first along the lower coils, then the middle, then up and up until the whole apparatus burned like a struck match held against the dark. The number that appeared in the air above the dais, written in cold blue light, was 9140. The hall exhaled as one animal. Even the staff table allowed itself a stir. 9000 was a number you read about in the histories, the kind of ceiling that produced horrors and unspeakables and the occasional minor catastrophe. Roll removed his hand, examined his own palm with mild interest, and returned to his seat through a corridor of stairs he did not appear to notice. He didn't even reach his ceiling, Hermione said 2 seats down to nobody in the tone of a woman noting that a sum had failed to balance. "That's the read at current capacity." His actual lines. "They'll have to recalibrate the upper register." "Brilliant," said Ron. "Wonderful, love that for him." The reading went on. Granger, Hermione, 6030, and a ripple of respect, because everyone knew her ceiling was high, but everyone also knew she lived practically on top of it, which meant the number was nearly all earned, every point of it dragged up out of her by sheer refusal to be anything less than first. Malfoy Draco, 5500, and Draco accepted the figure with the air of a prince receiving a tribute he considered slightly beneath him. Weasley Ronald, 4200, which was a perfectly respectable number, a number a person could build a life on, and Ron grinned and pretended he hadn't been worried. Then there was a stretch of names in the 3s and 2s, the broad middle of the school, the students who would grow up to keep the wizarding world running without ever appearing in a single history book, and Harry watched them go up one by one and put their hands on the iron and light it to whatever height was theirs, and he understood with the flat clarity of a person watching a tide come in that there was no version of the next 10 minutes that ended well. Potter Harry. He had imagined this moment in enough detail that walking it felt like rereading something. The benches, the angle of the enchanted ceiling, which today showed a sky the gray of wet slate, the particular weight of 280 faces turning at once, which had a pressure to it, an actual pressure like standing chest deep in a river. He climbed the 3 steps to the dais. The iron was cold under his palm, colder than iron had any business being, drinking the warmth out of his hand. He poured everything he had into it. That was the instruction. Will the magic up, all of it, hold nothing back, let the gauge find your ceiling. He thought of every spell he had ever cast, every time the warmth had risen in his chest and gone out through his wand and become light. He reached down into the place where that warmth lived and he pulled. The silver wire along the bottom coil flickered. It managed a sullen, guttering glow, the color of a coal an hour after the fire has died. The number that wrote itself in the air above the dais was 4, not 400, not 4,000, 4. For one merciful second Harry thought the gauge had broken. Then he heard the laughter start, and he understood that the gauge had not broken. The gauge had done its job with perfect fidelity, and the thing that had broken was older, and the thing that had broken was him. "There must be," Hermione said into the noise, and even she could not finish it, because there was no end to the sentence that did not insult someone. Somebody near the Hufflepuff table said the word that would follow Harry for the rest of the year, said it not cruelly but in the helpless reflex of finding the only label that fit: "He's a Null." And the word went around the hall like water, finding the low places: "Null, Null, Potter's a Null." And up on the dais Harry took his hand off the cold iron and looked at the 4 hanging in the air in its mocking blue, and decided that he was not going to give them the face. They could have the number, they could have the laughter, they were not going to get the face. "That can't be his ceiling." Hermione was still going, working the problem aloud because the problem offended her. "A ceiling of 4 is incompatible with being alive. The baseline draw to keep a wizard's core stable is higher than 4. He should be in a hospital, he should be dead." "And yet," drawled Draco Malfoy loud enough to carry, "here he is walking around lowering property values. The famous Harry Potter. They put him on chocolate frog cards. They should have read the small print." Pause for effect, because Draco was many things, but he was never not a performer. Defeated the Dark Lord as a baby. Couldn't defeat a first year now, couldn't defeat a particularly motivated houseplant. The laughter found a second wind. Up at the staff table, Albus Dumbledore was watching. Harry caught it on his way down the steps. The half-moon glasses turned his direction. The long fingers steepled under the silver beard, and there was nothing grandfatherly in the look just then, nothing of the twinkle the headmaster wore the way other men wore aftershave. For a single unguarded instant, the most powerful wizard alive was looking at a number in the air over the dais, with the still, evaluating attention of a chess player who has noticed something about the board the other side has not. Then the twinkle came back on like a lamp, and Dumbledore inclined his head a courteous fraction, and the moment folded itself away so neatly that Harry would have doubted he'd seen it at all, except that Harry had spent 4 years being underestimated by experts, and he knew the difference between a person who pitied you and a person who was deciding what to do about you. He went back to the bench and sat down and did not say anything, and Ron, loyal to the bone, said, "The gauge is rubbish anyway," which they both knew was not true, and Harry was grateful for the lie the way you are grateful for a coat that does not quite fit but is the only coat. The rest of the reading happened to other people. The thing about being the lowest-rated wizard in 400 years of recorded standings was that it reorganized your entire social topology in the course of an afternoon, and it did so with the speed and thoroughness of weather. By dinner the story had finished crossing the school and started crossing itself, picking up flourishes on each pass. Harry's ceiling had been 4. No, it had been negative. The gauge had run backward. No, the gauge had refused to light at all, and Sinistra had put the 4 up out of charity. No, Potter wasn't a Null, he was something worse than a Null. There wasn't a word for it yet. The index office was inventing one. In defense against the dark arts the next morning, the new arrangement made itself official. "We'll be working the shield charm to capacity today," Professor Aldous said. A square gray man recently arrived from the Ministry's Department of Standards, who pronounced the word capacity the way priests pronounce sacred. "Pratigo is an excellent diagnostic. The strength of the shield maps directly to magical output, which maps directly to ceiling proximity. So, let us see who has been doing the work and who has been telling themselves stories." His eyes traveled the room and arrived at Harry and stopped there a beat too long, the way a finger stops on a misprint. "Mr. Potter, since the school is curious, begin." It was not subtle, it was not meant to be. The class arranged itself to watch, and Harry stood up and lifted his wand and said Pratigo, and a shield formed in front of him, a faint silver disc the size of a dinner plate, thin as breath on a window. Aldous flicked a stinging hex at it, the gentle classroom kind, and the shield popped like a soap bubble, and the hex caught Harry on the shoulder and stung. The class made the sound classes make. "As expected," said Aldous and turned to the board, and that was the worst of it, the turning away, the verdict delivered and the case closed, and the convict not even worth the courtesy of a sentence. "Mr. Roll, perhaps you'll restore the class's faith in the year. To capacity, if you please." Cassian Roll rose, said Pratigo in a voice like someone closing a ledger, and a shield bloomed in front of him that was not a disc but a wall, a sheet of hammered silver light that ran floor to ceiling and curved at the edges. And when Aldous threw the stinging hex at it, the hex did not pop the shield. The hex came back, reflected at a precise downward angle into the stone floor where it scorched a black star. The class made a different sound. "That," said Aldous, "is what proximity to a high ceiling looks like. Note it, aspire to it where you can, accept it where you cannot." He did not look at Harry, he did not have to. The whole room was already doing it for him. Harry sat down and looked at his own hands, which were perfectly ordinary hands, and ran the equation again, the one Hermione had blurted out in the hall. A ceiling of 4 was incompatible with being alive. The baseline draw to keep a core stable was higher than 4. By the arithmetic of the gauge, Harry Potter should not have a pulse. And yet his pulse was right there in his wrist, ticking along, stubborn and unimpressed by the mathematics, which meant one of two things. Either Harry was a walking violation of magical law, a corpse that hadn't been informed, or the gauge had measured something real and called it the wrong name. He turned the second possibility over for the rest of the lesson, because it was the only one that did not require him to be dead. Suppose the gauge measured a real quantity. Suppose that quantity was genuinely, for Harry, a 4. But suppose the gauge had been built by people so certain that ceilings were fixed that they had never thought to ask whether the number they measured was a ceiling at all, or whether it might be something else wearing a ceiling's clothes, a floor, for instance, a starting line, the smallest number the machine could find in a person for whom the largest number had simply not been written yet. It was a comforting thought, and Harry distrusted it precisely because it was comforting. He had noticed that the thoughts which made you feel better were not, statistically, the ones that turned out to be true. The world did not generally arrange itself around your need to feel better. He put the idea where he put all the ideas he wanted to keep but couldn't yet use in the back on a shelf, labeled probably nonsense, check later. Still, there was a test buried in the idea, and Harry liked tests because a test was a thing the world could not lie its way out of. If the 4 was a ceiling, then no amount of effort would ever move it, and he would spend his life crawling toward it and never once past. But if the 4 was a floor, then effort would move it, even a little, even once, and a single point of movement where a ceiling should have held would bring the whole edifice down. He did not have a way to run the test yet. He had a wand that made a shield like breath on a window, and a gauge that had read him at 4, and a school that had laughed. But a person who knows which test would settle a question is already halfway to its answer, and Harry went back to copying Aldous' notes off the board with the private patience of someone who has found, in the middle of a bad day, a loose thread he intends to pull. The index board lived in the entrance hall, a slab of black slate as wide as a barn door, and the school's whole social weather blew off it. It updated itself. Names rose and fell in their narrow columns whenever someone sat a rereading or won a sanctioned challenge, a slow churn of fortunes that most students checked the way grown wizards checked the stock pages, with the particular dishonesty of people pretending it didn't matter while reading every line. After the reading, there was always a crowd. This evening the crowd was larger, and it had a center, and the center was the very bottom of the board, where a new entry had written itself in the cramped hand, the slate reserved for record-setting figures, because the figure Harry had set was a record, the kind they would be teaching as a curiosity for years. Potter H. Ceiling 4, standing 280 of 280. Somebody had conjured a tiny arrow next to it, animated, looping, pointing down at the number and wagging like a finger. Harry stood at the back of the crowd and watched a third-year sketch it bigger. "You don't have to look at it," Ron said, planted at his shoulder with the grim devotion of a man guarding a door nobody was attacking. "I know how it works, Ron. I look at it now on my own while it's a choice, or I get ambushed by it in a corridor every day for a month." Harry tipped his head at the slate. "Better to make friends with the thing that's going to follow you around." That is the single most depressing sentence I have ever heard a person say. "Thank you, I've been working on it." The crowd parted the way crowds part for money, and Draco came through the gap with Crabbe and Goyle behind him like two pieces of furniture that had learned to walk. He stopped in front of the board, considered Harry's entry with the air of a connoisseur, and addressed the hall rather than Harry because Draco never wasted an audience. "Do you know," he said, "they're going to have to widen the board. 400 years they've been keeping the standing, and nobody ever scored low enough to need a new column at the bottom. You're a milestone, Potter, a genuine milestone, like the first man to fall off a broom and the first man to set himself on fire brewing a pepper up." He turned finally, and there was the smile he kept for occasions. "Tell me, when the gauge lit up the color of a dying ember, did it hurt, or do you not have enough in there to feel it?" There was a script for this, and the script said Harry should go red and say something hot and lose. He looked at Draco's smile and found, where the old heat should have been, a flat and unfamiliar distance, the steadiness of a person who has privately begun to doubt a verdict everyone else considers settled. He had no proof of anything yet. He had only the shelf in the back of his mind where probably nonsense, check later, sat and waited. But a shrug cost nothing, and it was the one move the script had never prepared Draco to answer. "It tickled," Harry said. "It landed wrong for Draco, who had braced for heat and got served a shrug, and a person braced for heat who meets cold does not know what to do with his face." He recovered, said something about houseplants that was less funny the second time, and left with his furniture, and Ron exhaled like a kettle taken off the boil. "How," Ron said, "are you this calm? Practice." That was when Hermione arrived, and Hermione did not look at Harry the way the rest of them did. The rest of them looked at him the way you look at a wreck on the side of the road, with the relief of a person it didn't happen to. Hermione looked at him the way she looked at a problem set with a misprinted answer key, which is to say she looked annoyed at the universe on his behalf. "It's wrong," she said without preamble, because preamble was for people with time to waste. "The number. It's not a low ceiling, Harry, it's an impossible one. I went and read the standards manual at lunch. The minimum sustaining draw, the magic a course spends just keeping a wizard breathing and warm and not leaking out his ears, is rated at 30. 30 is the floor of being alive. Squibs read between 30 and 90 and they can't cast, but they're alive. The magic just stays inside doing maintenance. You read 4. 4 is a quarter of what a corpse would read. She folded her arms. So either the gauge malfunctioned, which it has never done in 400 years and is enchanted 9 ways against doing, or it measured something true and we are all calling it the wrong thing, and I find I cannot stop thinking about which. Ron looked between them. Are you saying he's secretly fine? I'm saying, Hermione said, that a number which is impossible is not the same as a number which is low, and that everyone in this hall has confused the two because the second one is funnier. She glanced at the board at the wagging arrow with open distaste. There's a difference between a thing that is small and a thing that hasn't been measured yet. The gauge can't tell them apart. It only has the one needle. A thing that is small and a thing that hasn't been measured yet. Harry kept his face exactly where it was, which took, just then, immeasurable effort because she had walked, by pure reasoning, from her side of the dark all the way up to the edge of his secret, and stopped one step short, not knowing the step was there. Anyway, she said, it doesn't matter for the standing. You know that, I assume. Pretend I don't. She nodded at the slate at a smaller column down the right side where a different set of names rose and fell faster than the rest. The trials. The Ascension trials, the reading sets where you start, but the ladder is how it moves. Sanctioned duels refereed, witnessed, and a wind shifts your standing by whatever the gap was between you and the wizard you beat. Most people never bother because most people sit close to their ceiling already and a duel can't give them what their birth didn't. She paused. It's the one part of the whole system that doesn't care what the gauge says about you. It only cares what you do in the circle. Theoretically, a Null could climb it. Her mouth did something complicated. Theoretically, if a Null could win a duel, which no offense would require winning a duel. None taken, Harry said. I'm collecting the offenses. I'll cash them in later. She studied him a second longer, and there was the annoyance again, aimed at the universe, and underneath it something that wasn't pity, which was rarer than gold in that hall tonight. Then she gathered her bag and went, and Ron watched her go and said, she's the only one acting like you didn't die. And Harry said, yeah, and looked at the column on the right side of the board, the ladder, the one part of the machine that didn't care about the gauge, that only cared what you did in the circle, and put it on the shelf next to probably nonsense, check later, on a fresh line of its own. He did not go to dinner. He couldn't have said exactly why, except that the great hall had a 4 floating over it in his memory now, painted on the inside of the air, and he did not want to eat under it. So he walked. Hogwarts at night was a good place to be a person nobody wanted to look at, because the castle did not care about your standing. The staircases swung the same for a 4 as for a 9,000, and the suits of armor creaked their indifferent creaks at everyone equally. He went up because up felt like a direction, and somewhere around the 7th floor he found a stretch of corridor he didn't have any memory of. A blank length of wall across from a tapestry of a man attempting to teach ballet to trolls, and because he had nowhere to be and no one expecting him, he stopped there and leaned his back against the stone and slid down it until he was sitting, and he let his head tip back, and he looked at the ceiling of the corridor, which was, he thought, the only ceiling at Hogwarts he had any chance of reaching. 4, he said to the empty corridor, trying the word on out loud, the way you press a bruise to confirm it's real. 4, he was not going to cry about it. He had decided that already on the dais with 280 people watching, and a decision made under those conditions was a decision with some steel in it. He was the weakest wizard in 4 centuries. Fine. It was a fact like the weather, and you did not argue with the weather. You put on a coat. He would find a coat. He would learn the spells that did not need power, the cleverness that did the work brute strength couldn't. There were such spells. There had to be. A person with a teaspoon and enough years could move a mountain. The trick was just to live long enough and not mind the teaspoon. It was a brave little plan, and he almost believed it, and that was when the world disagreed with him. The disagreement did not announce itself. There was no thunder. There was a sensation low and central in the place behind his sternum where the warmth lived, the place he reached into when he cast, and the sensation was that something there had been holding very still for a very long time and had just fractionally moved, like a held breath at the bottom of deep water, like a lock that has been turned 100 times by the wrong key, feeling at last the right one slide home. Then there was text. It hung in the air a foot in front of his face, glowing a clean, steady white edge like something printed rather than written, and it was not a hallucination, because Harry had been raised by people committed to telling him his perceptions were wrong, and he had developed, in defense, a very exact sense of the difference between a thing he was imagining and a thing that was actually there. This was actually there. It cast a faint light on the stone. It put a glow on his own knees. System online. He did not move. He had learned that much from a childhood of cupboards. When something impossible happens, you do not move, you watch, you gather data, you do not give the impossible thing any reason to decide you are a problem. The first line faded. A second took its place, unhurried, as if whatever was writing it had all the time that had ever been made and intended to spend it carefully. Assessing host. Host designation, Potter Harry James. Ceiling detected, none. Harry read the third line twice. None, not 4, not low, none. He thought about the difference between zero and absence, between an empty cup and no cup, between a number too small to matter and the refusal of number itself, and something in his chest that he would not yet let himself call by any name began, very quietly, to turn over. The text held a moment, steady, patient, and then it cleared all at once, and what replaced it was larger, and it was centered, and it burned a degree brighter than anything that had come before, so that for a half-second the gray stone of the corridor went white at the edges, and the dancer in the tapestry across the hall stopped teaching trolls and shielded his painted eyes. Level CAP removed. Ascend without limit. The voice arrived with the words. Not in the corridor in him, threaded through the same place behind his sternum that had moved. It was not warm, and it was not cruel. It did not love him, and it did not pity him, and Harry understood at once that this was the most honest thing that had spoken to him in days, possibly years, because everyone else who looked at him these days was busy feeling something about him, and this voice felt nothing. It only reported, the way the gauge had reported, except that the gauge had been wrong, and this, he already suspected, was not. Level CAP removed, said the voice, clipped and level and final. Ascend without limit. What, said Harry with great precision to the empty air, are you? There was a pause, the text rearranged. I am the system. You have been measured by an instrument that finds ceilings. You have none. The instrument reported the only number it could, the smallest. IT mistook a floor for a limit. And there it was, the thought he had put on the back shelf that afternoon, labeled probably nonsense, check later, handed back to him by something that had reached onto the shelf and taken it down. He should have been afraid. Some quiet committee at the back of his skull was indeed filing the motion, on the grounds that disembodied voices granting unlimited power were historically a setup and not a gift. He noted the motion, he tabled it. There would be time for that later, and there was never, in his experience, enough time to gather data, so you gathered it while you could. Prove it, Harry said. Stand. He stood. His legs were steadier than he expected. Cast. Cast what? Anything. Cast with intent. The instrument measured you when you poured out everything you had. It found 4. Cast again. Pour out everything. We will see what it finds now. Harry raised his wand. He thought about the shield he made that morning, the silver disc thin as breath, the one that had popped and let the hex through, and the heat that came into his face thinking about it was useful. He decided it was fuel. You could burn a bad morning the same as you could burn anything else if you were cold enough about it. He reached down into the place behind his sternum, the place that had moved, and this time it did not feel like a coal an hour dead. This time it felt like a door. Pratigo, he said. The shield that formed in front of him was a disc. It was the same faint silver disc as that morning, the same dinner plate size, the same breath on a window thinness, and for one falling instant Harry thought, of course, it was a trick after all, a cruel one. Then the door behind his sternum, which he had only pushed, came off its hinges. He felt the magic go out of him in a way it never had, not a trickle up the arm and out the wand, but a flood. The warmth becoming heat, becoming something with no good name, pouring through the wand faster than he could meter it, and the silver disc in front of him did not grow exactly, it deepened. It went from the color of breath to the color of a struck blade to a white so total it had weight, and it spread, edge running out past edge, a disc becoming a wall, becoming a curve. And the corridor filled with light, his light he had made, and the dancer in the tapestry threw his painted arms over his head, and the trolls scattered, and somewhere far below in the castle, a window that had nothing to do with any of this rattled in its frame. The text bloomed across the wall of white in letters of clean black, level up, level up, level up. 3 of them stacked fast, one after another, the way coins fall when the machine finally pays out. Then beneath, larger, the line he would come to know the way a sailor knows the sound of the sea, the line that meant the door had not only opened but been torn off and thrown away, the line that meant the floor he had been standing on his whole life had been, all along, the lid of something, limit broken. The shield held one more second, blazing, a small white sun caught between 2 corridor walls. Then Harry let go, and it went out, not popping but folding, drawing itself back into him the way a tide goes home, and the corridor was dark again, and the dancer in the tapestry lowered his arms and looked around with the wronged expression of someone who had been minding his own business. Harry stood in the dark with his wand still up and his pulse going like a drum and his whole arm humming, and he started helplessly to laugh, not at anything, at everything, at the 4. At Aldous turning to the board, at Draco and the houseplant, at 400 years of a machine telling people exactly how high they could go, and at the 1 student in 4 centuries the machine had read as nothing because nothing was the only word it had for a quantity it could not contain. Assessment, the system offered when the laughing had run down. Go on, the text drew itself into a frame, ruled lines, clean columns, hanging in the dark like a window onto a room made of arithmetic. Host Potter Harry James, level 4 ceiling, none power, 11 control, 6 speed, 7 resilience, 9 insight, 14 note, 1 shield charm, cast to intent, raised output from 4 to 11. The instrument would now read you differently. It will not be given the chance unless you choose to give it. Harry read the window twice, insight 14. The highest of his stats was the one nobody could see, the one the gauge had no column for, the one that had spent 4 years watching the world underestimate him and saying nothing and gathering data. course it was. Of course the machine that measured wizards by how much light they could throw had never thought to measure the thing inside the wizard that decided where to throw it. How high does it go, he said. The leveling, you said no limit. You meant something by that, or you didn't. I meant IT without qualification. Every wizard you have ever met grows toward a line and stops. The stopping is not a weakness, it is the design. Something long ago decided that wizards SHOLD have ceilings and built the ceilings in, and the gauge you stood before today is not a measuring device. It is a mirror held up to a cage so that every prisoner may admire the exact dimensions of his cell. Your cell has no walls. I do not know WHY. I know only that when I woke I found a host with no ceiling, and my function is simple, to count what you gain and to never ever tell you to stop. You cast one spell and rose 4 levels. The easy gains will come easily AT first because you begin so low, they will not stay easy. Growth feeds ON difficulty. The STEPER the challenge, the STEPERTHE climb. If you want to rise, you will have to go where the danger is. Fortunately, in here for the only time that night, Harry could have sworn the flat clean letters held something almost dry, almost amused, almost like a thing that had been built to count and had developed, against its design and opinion. You attend a school organized entirely around ranking who is dangerous. Harry looked down the dark corridor toward the rest of the castle, toward the great hall with its 4 floating in his memory, toward the standing posted on the index board where his name sat at the very bottom of 400 years of names. Somewhere down their cash and roll was a 9,000 and climbing. Somewhere down there Draco was rehearsing tomorrow's houseplant joke. Somewhere down there a square gray man from the Department of Standards was certain, absolutely certain, that he had seen the full and final measure of Harry Potter that morning and found it wanting. And up here in the dark there was a window made of arithmetic that said power 11, that said level 4, that said ceiling, none, and a voice that had been built to count and had been given, for reasons it did not understand, a thing without end to count toward. Here was the part that mattered, the part Harry would think about later, on the nights when the climbing got hard enough to make him wonder why he'd started. The voice had offered him no limit. And the very first thing his mind had done with no limit was not picture revenge on Draco, or the look on Aldous' face, or a number in the air bigger than Cassion's. The very first thing his mind had done was ask how high, not to show anyone, just to know. Because he had been told his whole life exactly where the line was, and now there was no line, and a person who has lived his whole life inside a measured cage, and is suddenly told the cage was never real does not, in the first hour, dream of conquering the world. He dreams, very simply, of finding out how far he can walk. All right, Harry said to the corridor, to the system, to the 400 years of names with his at the bottom. His voice came out steadier than he had any right to expect. All right. How high does it go? A beat. Let's find out. Acknowledged. Quest available. Ascend. Objective. There is none. That is the objective. He almost laughed again. Instead, he pushed himself off the wall and put his wand away and stood a moment in the dark getting used to the new weight of the world, which was the weight of a ceiling removed, which turned out to feel exactly like the absence of weight, like the first second after you set down something you'd been carrying so long you'd forgotten it was heavy. Then he had a thought and it stopped him cold, and it was the thought that would shape everything that came after, the thought of a person who has been underestimated by experts and has learned what underestimation is worth. He could tell them. Tomorrow he could walk into the great hall and put his hand on the gauge and light it to 11, to 20, to whatever he climbed to by morning, and watch the laughter die in their throats. He could have the face he'd refused them on the dais, could have it back tenfold, could stand in the wreckage of his own legend and be reborn in front of the whole school as something none of them had a word for. Or he could say nothing. He could let the 4 stand. He could let Draco keep his houseplant joke and Aldous keep his certainty, and the whole school keep the comfortable, settled, 400-year-old belief that they knew exactly what Harry Potter was. Because a wizard with no ceiling, climbing in secret, in a world that thought he was the weakest creature it had ever measured, was holding a card so large that the table did not have a name for it, and you did not show a card like that. You did not even let them know you were holding cards. You let them go on believing the game was over and you were the loser, and you played quietly in the dark, until the day you decided the moment had come to turn your hand over, and on that day the look on their faces would be worth more than every cheap gasp he could buy tomorrow morning. The voice had told him growth fed on difficulty, that the easy gains would not stay easy, that he would have to go where the danger was. And the most dangerous place in his entire small world, he understood now, standing in the dark with no ceiling over his head, was not the forbidden forest or the restricted section or whatever waited out beyond the gates with the dark mark on its arm. The most dangerous place was the gap between what he was and what they thought he was. He intended to live in that gap. He intended to make it his home. And he intended, when the time came, to bring the whole house down. Don't tell me to stop, he said to the system, and started walking back toward the moving stairs, toward the common room, toward the long, careful secret that the rest of his year was going to be. "I was not built to," said the system, and the words faded into the dark, and Harry Potter, ranked the weakest student in 400 years, the famous Null, the houseplant's inferior, went down to bed with 11 points of power he had not had that morning, and a quest with no objective and the first true smile he'd worn in days. The kind you wear when you are the only person in the room who knows the room is on fire, and you are the one holding the match. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, The Grind. The trouble with a secret is that it wants to be spent. Harry learned this in the first hour after the corridor, lying in his four-poster with the curtains drawn and Ron snoring 2 beds over, holding 11 points of power he had not had that morning, the way a child holds a coin too large to buy anything with. There was nowhere to put it. He couldn't tell Ron, who would tell his face before he told his mouth. He couldn't tell a teacher, because a teacher would tell Dumbledore, and Harry had seen the look at the staff table, the one that came off and on like a lamp, and you did not bring a card that large to someone who was already deciding what to do about you. He couldn't even spend it on himself, not really, because the only proof he had that any of it was real was a window of glowing text nobody else could see, and a single shield charm cast once in an empty corridor, witnessed by a painted dance instructor who was not a reliable narrator. So at 2 in the morning he got up and put on his father's cloak and went to find out whether the night before had happened. The 7th floor corridor was where he'd left it. Blank wall troll tapestry, the painted dancer in the weave still rubbing his eyes at the memory of a light that had blinded him hours ago. Harry stood across from the wall and considered it. He needed a place. He needed it badly enough that the need had a shape, and the shape was somewhere no one would find him, where he could throw spells until his arm fell off and nobody would ever know. He walked past the wall 3 times, thinking it, and on the 3rd pass a door grew out of the stone the way frost grows on glass, fast and silent and complete. Location discovered, the command go room. Function becomes what the seeker requires. Assessment suitable. Suitable for what? Harry murmured, grinding. He looked at the word hanging in the air, flat and clean and entirely without apology, and decided that whatever the system was, it had not been built by anyone delicate. Inside, the room had taken him at his word. It was long and low and bare, the walls of featureless gray stone that would not remember a scorch mark in the morning, and down the center ran a line of practice dummies, the armored kind from the dueling primers, stuffed with straw and charmed to stand back up when knocked down. At the far end a target hung from nothing, a circle inside a circle inside a circle. The air had the dustless stillness of a place that did not, in any ordinary sense, exist. Harry rolled up his sleeves. He started with the spell he knew best, because you began with what you could measure. Expelliarmus, he said, and the disarming charm leapt from his wand and slapped the nearest dummy hard enough to spin it on its base, and a window opened. Expelliarmus cast, XP plus 3. He cast it again. The dummy spun, XP plus 1. Again, XP plus 1. Again, the dummy spinning, the straw arm flopping, and the numbers came slower each time and then stopped coming at all, and the window adjusted itself to tell him why in the patient tone of a thing explaining gravity to someone who has just discovered falling. Repetition YILDS diminishing return. The first time you do a thing, you learn it. The 100th time, you are only proving you already have. The system rewards becoming, not having become. So that was one law. Drilling the same charm into the same dummy was a treadmill motion without distance. Harry put the principle not on the shelf of probably nonsense, but on a new shelf, a working shelf, the kind you build when you have stopped doubting a thing and started using it. He tried the opposite. He picked a spell he had never managed, the severing charm at full strength, the one that took a steady hand and a steadier core, the one he'd always botched because there had never been enough behind it. He aimed at the target down the long room, said Defindo, and put into it the new thing, the flood, the door off its hinges. The charm crossed the room as a line of pale force and took the outer ring of the target clean off, and the cut edge glowed and smoked, and 3 windows stacked themselves in the air. Defindo cast, new spell, XP plus 40. Skill unlocked, severing, rank I 40 against the one he'd been getting for Expelliarmus. He read the gap and understood the second law before the system bothered to state it. Novelty paid, and it paid in proportion to how far the new thing sat beyond the old. Relearning a spell you'd already half-owned was worth a few coins. Reaching past where your hands had always stopped and finding that this time they didn't, that was worth a fortune. Correct, the system said, reading, as it apparently could, the shape of the thought rather than waiting for the words. Growth is the distance between what you were and what you just did. Short distances pay little. There is a third law. You have not found it yet. You will not find IT tonight because it cannot be found alone in a room. Tell me anyway. No. Why not? Because you will value it more when it costs you something to learn. I am not here to make you comfortable. I am here to count. Harry let that sit. There was something restful about being spoken to by a thing that did not flatter him, did not pity him, did not need anything from him except that he keep going. Everyone else in his life wanted him to be a particular Harry, the brave one or the doomed one or the disappointing one, and arranged the evidence to suit. The system wanted nothing. It watched and counted and refused on principle to lie. He trusted it the way you trust a cliff edge, which is to say completely, and only because it has never once pretended to be anything other than what it is. He worked until the windows blurred. He learned the conjunctivitis curse off a page he'd half remembered from a defense text and turned a dummy's painted eyes to running tar. He took the stinging hex apart and found he could throw it in a fan, 4 bolts at once, splitting his attention 4 ways and holding all 4, and the system gave him control for that, not power, because the difficulty had not been in the strength but in the steering. He set a dummy alight, doused it, lit it again from across the room without a word, just thinking the fire and the will of the fire, and a window he had not seen before unfolded in clean capitals. Silent casting. Threshold REACHED. A spell spoken is a spell announced. You will want soon to stop announcing. He chased that one for an hour because it was the most useful thing it had told him. A spell with no incantation was a spell with no warning, and a wizard who needed no warning was a wizard who, in the half-second every duel turns on, was already a half-second ahead. He learned to drop the words off the easy spells first, the shield and the disarm, and each time the saying fell away the casting got faster, until his speed, which had started the lowest of all his numbers, began to climb. By the time the room's enchanted light began, very faintly, to suggest morning, the column of his stats had changed enough that he stopped and read it twice, the way you reread a letter saying you've won something. Host Potter Harry James, level 19 ceiling, none power 38 control 27 speed 22 resilience 24 insight 31 19. He had gone to bed a 4, woken a 4 in the eyes of every soul at Hogwarts, and now in the small hours he was a 19, and the 19 was real. It lived in his arm and his chest and the smoking ruin at the end of the room, and not one person in the world knew it but him and a voice built to count. He should have been pleased. He noted the absence where that feeling should go and found in its place something colder and more useful. The flat arithmetic of a person who has confirmed that the impossible thing is not only true but reliable, and who has therefore stopped wondering whether and started planning how far. He put out the last of the fires, told the room to forget him, and went down to breakfast a 19 pretending to be a 4. The pretending, it turned out, was the hard part. There is a particular skill in doing badly on purpose, and Harry did not have it. He discovered the gap that very morning in Charms, where Flitwick had them levitating feathers to height, the height a rough proxy for control, and Harry lifted his feather to the modest, embarrassing altitude of a Null and held it there and felt the spell strain against him from the wrong direction, the way a strong man strains to lift a teacup slowly enough to look weak. The feather wanted to go up. He wanted it to go up. The only thing keeping it at Null height was a deliberate, effortful, second-by-second decision to fail, and failing on purpose took more concentration than succeeding. "Adequate, Mr. Potter," said Flitwick in the kindly, careful voice the staff had all adopted with him since the reading, the voice you use on the recently bereaved. "Don't strain. We work to capacity here, not beyond it. There's no shame in your capacity. There's no shame in your capacity." They said it like a blessing. They meant it like one, and Harry held his Null-height feather and wore the dim, grateful face of a boy being told his limits were nothing to apologize for, and thought, "You have no idea what my capacity is. None of you do. You measured the cup and never asked what it held." 2 rows over, Hermione was not looking at her own feather, which hung at a textbook altitude with the bored steadiness of a thing that had given up trying to impress her. She was looking at Harry's hand, at his wand. At the precise, unwavering stillness of a feather held at exactly Null height by a boy who, last week, could not have held it there at all, because last week it would have fallen. Failing on purpose has a signature. Genuine incompetence wobbles. It overshoots and undershoots and lands by accident. What Harry was doing did not wobble. His feather sat at Null height with the machined steadiness of a thing being held there, and Hermione Granger had read enough theory to know that steadiness was the one quality weakness could not fake. She said nothing. She turned back to her own work with the studied incuriosity of a person who has just decided to find something out. And Harry, watching her not watch him, understood that the cloak he'd chosen, the famous Null, the houseplant's inferior, had a hole in it, and the hole was shaped exactly like the cleverest witch in his year. He caught her after in the bottleneck where the Charms corridor fed the stairs, because the only thing worse than Hermione investigating you was Hermione investigating you without supervision. "You think I'm cheating," he said. She did not pretend not to know what he meant, which he respected. "I think," she said, "that a week ago you couldn't levitate a feather to save your life, and this morning you held one at constant height for 4 minutes with less drift than I have ever seen from anyone, including me, and that those 2 facts do not belong to the same person." She shifted her bag higher on her shoulder. "Cheating would be the comforting explanation, Harry. I'd love it if you were cheating. I've considered 6 other explanations. 4 are impossible and the other 2 frighten me. So, cheating? Please tell me it's cheating." He looked at her, and the weighing did not take long because he had already done most of it in the 4-poster at 2 in the morning, holding a coin too large to spend. A secret wants to be spent, and there was exactly one person in the castle who would treat the truth not as gossip, not as a weapon, not as a thing to run to Dumbledore with, but as a problem, a beautiful broken problem with a misprinted answer key, the kind she could not leave alone. Not here, he said. Tonight, the fourth floor, the empty classroom past the tapestry. I'll show you something, and you're going to want to sit down before I do. That, said Hermione, is the most interesting sentence anyone has said to me all year, and went to her next class walking slightly too fast. He did not show her the room. The room felt like the one thing that was wholly his, and a person learning to play a card the size of the table does not show his whole hand the first night. He showed her instead the empty classroom and a wall, and he said reducto, and put into it not the flood, not the door off its hinges, just enough, a measured pour, a tenth of what he had. The wall did not crack, the wall came apart. A section the size of a window blew inward into the next room in a spray of grit that hung in the lamplight and settled over both of them like gray snow, and through the new hole you could see the corridor beyond and a portrait on the far wall yelling about vandalism. Hermione looked at the hole, she looked at Harry, she looked at the hole again. She got out her wand and repaired it with a reparo that knitted the stone back grain by grain, because her first response to any catastrophe was always to make it tidy, and only when the wall was whole and the dust was banished did she turn around and say, in a voice gone very level, that was a quarter of a reducto. A tenth, you're a null, I'm really not. And then he told her, the corridor, the 4 turning into 11. The window made of arithmetic and the voice built to count, and the laws he'd worked out in the room he didn't mention, the diminishing return and the price of novelty and the third law it wouldn't name. He told her ceiling, none. He watched the scientist in her go to war with the impossible and lose and rally and lose again, and the thing that decided him forever on the matter of Hermione Granger was that she never once said it couldn't be true. She said, show me the stat window, and does the experience scale linearly or does the level requirement climb? And when it says no ceiling, do you take that as a measurement or a promise, because those are extremely different things, and every question was the question of a person who had accepted the data and gone straight to wanting more of it. It's not a promise, Harry said, it's a description. Everyone else grows toward a line and stops. I don't stop. Everyone stops, Hermione said slowly, working it as she spoke, the way she worked everything out loud with her hands. That's the whole of magical theory, Harry, 400 years of it. The ceiling is the founding assumption, it sits under everything. Apparition limits, the laws of elemental transfiguration. Why nobody has ever just brute-forced an unbreakable curse. We assume the ceiling because everyone has always had one. She stopped. Her eyes had the bright fixed look of a person seeing the back of a thing for the first time, which means nobody has ever asked why. Nobody asks why water is wet. You don't investigate the floor you stand on, and if you never investigate it, you would never notice it isn't the ground, it's a lid. That's what the system called it, a cage. The gauge is a mirror held up to a cage so every prisoner can admire the size of his cell. Hermione was quiet a moment, and when she spoke again, some of the brightness had gone careful. Harry, if ceilings were built, then somebody built them. You don't put a lid on a thing for no reason. You put a lid on a thing to keep it in, or, and she looked at him, really looked, to keep something else from noticing what's underneath. The classroom was very quiet. Down the corridor, the vandalized portrait had run out of outrage and started complaining to a neighbor. Harry thought about the system's one almost dry line, the only time it had sounded like anything but a ledger. I do not know why. I know only that when I woke, I found a host with no ceiling. You're saying I should be scared, he said. I'm saying you should be careful. There's a difference. Scared makes you small. Careful makes you slow, but slow is fine. Slow keeps your arms attached. She picked up her bag. I'm in, by the way, obviously. I can't pretend I'd walk away from this if I tried. You've ruined every other question I'll ever have. But I'm in as the person who tells you to be careful, because you clearly haven't got one of those, and a wizard with no ceiling and no brakes is just a very impressive accident waiting to happen. I have brakes. You blew a hole in a wall to make a point. You do not have brakes. You have me. Try not to confuse the two. The staff were not all the same, and Harry learned which ones to be careful of in Transfiguration that Thursday. McGonagall set them turning beetles into buttons, a second-year spell revisited for precision, and went up and down the rows saying little, which was worse than saying much, because her silences were a kind of reading. Harry turned his beetle into a button that was lumpy on one side and kept a faint suggestion of legs, which was exactly the quality a Null should produce, and the lumpiness was, he judged, convincing right up until he felt her stop behind him. She did not say adequate. She did not use the bereavement voice. She picked up his lumpy button, turned it over once in her fingers, set it down, and said, curious. Professor, the transfiguration is poor, Mr. Potter. The control is not. She was looking at the button and not at him, which was how he knew it had teeth. A weak wizard who fails this spell fails it messily. The legs run, the shell stays, the color comes out wrong in 3 places at once. Yours failed cleanly. You stopped it at exactly the same point of incompleteness on all 4 attempts to the millimeter. That is not the signature of a student who cannot do the spell. That is the signature of a student deciding how much of it to do. Her eyes came up to his, sharp behind the square frames, and there was none of the staff room pity in them. I have taught a long time. I know the difference between a child who has met his limit and a child who has found a reason to wear one. Whatever your reason is, I would think very hard about whether it is a good one. She moved on down the row. Harry sat with his 4 identical failures lined up in front of him and understood that the reading had not, in fact, told everyone the same thing. It had told most of them a story they were happy to believe, the comfortable little tragedy of the famous Null, and they had filed him under it and stopped looking. McGonagall had not stopped looking. The gauge had handed her a 4, and instead of laughing she had kept the 4 in one hand and the evidence of her own eyes in the other, and noticed that they did not match. There were going to be more like her. Aldous had stopped looking because contempt was easier than attention. McGonagall paid attention for a living. And somewhere above both of them was a man at a staff table whose lamp came on and off, who had looked at a number in the air over a dais and done arithmetic with it, and that man paid attention for a living too and had 400 years of reasons to be good at it. The cloak had a hole shaped like Hermione. It had a second one now, smaller, shaped like a teacher who counted millimeters. McGonagall's curious followed him to dinner and sat down with him through it. Ron talked about Quidditch tryouts and the new clean sweep and whether Gryffindor's chances this year were a 4 or a 6, and Harry made the right noises and watched his best friend not know him, and found that the hard part of a secret was not the keeping. It was the distance. Every laugh he shared with Ron now had a pane of glass behind it. Every time Ron called him mate, Harry heard the gap between the friend Ron thought he was talking to, the brave, doomed, disappointing Null, and the one actually sitting there, 31 levels deep and climbing, and the gap was the quietest weight he carried. He could close it in a sentence. He could tell Ron tonight, watch his face do the thing faces did, and gain an ally who would walk into fire for him and a liability who could not lie to save his own life. He didn't. Hermione could hold a secret because to her it was a problem, and you do not blurt a problem, you work it in the dark until it gives. Ron held secrets the way a sieve holds water, generously and not for long. So Harry kept the glass where it was and ate his treacle tart, and accepted that the climb was going to cost him things no window would ever bother to count. That was the night he stopped thinking of the secret as a treasure and started thinking of it as a clock. McGonagall had seen the seam. Others would. A boy who failed Beetles to the same millimeter 4 times running was a boy who would, sooner or later, fail convincingly, and on the day the seam tore open he wanted to be standing somewhere of his own choosing, holding his own cards and not cornered in a classroom explaining a lumpy button to a woman who counted millimeters. Hiding was not a plan. Hiding was a delay. And the only place in the castle where a Null could be seen doing impossible things and have the whole school explain it away as luck was a sunken floor inscribed with gold circles, where being watched was the entire point, and where every watcher came preloaded with the one belief that would keep them from ever guessing the truth, that ceilings are real, and his was 4. The third law found him on a Tuesday, the way important things do, dressed as an inconvenience. His name was Gawain Pike. He was a 6th year, and his entire personality was the 70 centimeters of height and the 400 points of standing he had over almost everyone in his path. Pike had a habit. He collected, on his way through the castle, small humiliations the way other people collected loose nuts, and since the reading he had developed a particular fondness for the cheapest currency in the school, which was Harry Potter. He caught Harry alone in a stairwell between defense and lunch with 2 friends for an audience, and did the thing he always did, a hex he considered witty, a jellylegs aimed low to drop you in front of people. It was lazy. It was telegraphed. A week ago it would have landed and Harry would have wobbled to the floor and the week would have been worse. Harry watched the wand come up and the spell start, and somewhere underneath the ordinary urge to duck a hex in a stairwell there was a second thing, quieter and far stranger, which was hunger. Not for Pike, for the spell, for the living, unscripted, dangerous fact of a real wand pointed at him by a person who actually meant it, which was nothing at all, like a straw dummy that stood back up when you knocked it down. He raised a shield without a word. Pike's hex hit it and died, and Pike's friends stopped laughing, and Pike, who had never in his life had a hex simply fail to arrive, stared at the silver disc between them with the look of a person whose chair has been pulled out from under a sitting position. The window that opened was not like the others. Live engagement detected. A willing opponent who intends you harm is the RICHESD teacher that EXISDS. He does not stand back up on a schedule. He ADAPTS. HE surprises. He punishes every error in real coin. This is the third law, XP multiplier active. So that was it, the thing it had refused to name in the room, the thing that could not be learned alone. The dummies had been a treadmill because they could not fight back. Hermione's wall had been worth 1/10 of a reducto and nothing more because the wall did not want anything. But Pike, sour and surprised and embarrassed Pike, wanted very much to put Harry on the floor, and every spell he threw was a question Harry had never been asked, and answering questions you have never been asked is the only thing in the world that makes you larger. Pike threw the jelly legs again, harder. Harry let it splash off the shield and stepped sideways, and the disc came with him, and he understood in his arm and not his head that he could move the shield, that it did not have to be a wall planted in the ground, that it could be a thing he wore. Pike switched to a stinging hex and then a clumsy knockback, and then, his temper going, the impediment jinx, and with each one Harry did the new thing, the thing he had not been able to do the spell before, and the windows came so fast they overlapped. XP plus 60, XP plus 85, control plus 2, XP plus 110. He did not hit Pike. That was the choice he made in the half-second he had, the choice that mattered, the one he would be glad of later, he could have. By the third exchange he could have ended it, put Pike through the stairwell wall and walked away the famous Null who'd somehow flattened a 6th year, and the school would have talked for a week, and Dumbledore's lamp would have come on and stayed on. So he didn't hit Pike. He let Pike hit himself. He waited until Pike threw the knockback jinx, and at the exact moment of the cast he dropped the shield and gave the wand the small twist he'd worked out on a dummy at 4 in the morning. The spell-turning trick the dueling primers called a half-deflection, the one that needs perfect timing and a core steady enough not to flinch, and Pike's own knockback rebounded off the angle and took Pike off his feet and sat him down hard on the stone 3 steps below in front of his 2 friends. With all the dignity of a dropped sack, "Slippery step," Harry said into the ringing quiet. "You want to watch those?" And he walked down past Pike and his stunned audience and out into the corridor, an ordinary boy who had obviously just gotten lucky, while behind his eyes a column of arithmetic climbed and climbed. Level up, level up, level up, level up, level 31, note 1 stairwell, 11 minutes, 12 levels. The third law is generous. It is also how people die. The RICHESD teacher is also the one most likely to kill you. 31, from a stairwell scuffle with a bully too vain to count his own hexes. Harry walked to lunch and sat down across from Ron and ate a sandwich and laughed in the right places and felt, under the ordinary noise of the Great Hall, the new weight of the number and the new shape of the problem, because the third law changed everything. Drilling in the room would always work, but it would always be slow, a treadmill with the incline turned up. The fast climb, the real climb, ran straight through other people, through opponents who meant it, through danger that punished every error in real coin. And there was exactly one place in his whole small world where you could fight opponents who meant it, refereed and witnessed and sanctioned, where every win moved you up a ladder built to measure precisely who was dangerous. "You've gone quiet," Ron said. "You're doing the wall thing. I'm thinking about the trials," Harry said. Ron put down his sandwich. "The Ascension trials, the duels." He said it the way you'd say the edge of a cliff to someone standing near one. "Harry, mate, I love you. The trials are for people with ceilings in the thousands. You'd be challenging wizards who can throw spells you can't survive. They let nulls enter because the rule's older than anybody who'd bother to stop one, and exactly nobody ever does it, because it isn't brave, it's just a very public way to get hurt." He leaned in. "Whatever you've got going on, and you've got something going on, you've been strange, and you've stopped falling over, and you smiled at Malfoy, which frankly, terrifying, whatever it is, the trials are not where you test it." And there it was, handed to him across a table by his best friend who loved him and did not know, the perfect cover. Of course it was insane for a null to enter the trials. Of course nobody would believe a 4 could win a duel, which meant that when the 4 won, they would not believe the 4 had won. They would believe luck, or that the opponent had thrown the match, or that the gauge had been a little wrong, low but not that low, the surprising tale of a brave boy doing slightly better than expected. The truth with no ceiling in it, would be the last explanation anyone reached for, because it was the only one nobody in 400 years had ever needed a word for. He could climb the whole ladder in plain sight, and they would call it luck the entire way up. "You're right," Harry told Ron, and meant the opposite. He went to watch a trial before he entered one, because you scouted the ground before you stood on it. The trial hall was a converted indoor courtyard off the east cloister, stone tiers rising around a sunken dueling floor inscribed with the old measuring circles, gold lines that flared when a spell crossed them and dimmed when it spent itself. On trial nights the tiers filled. The standing was the school's true religion, and this was where it was preached. Harry came in under the ordinary cover of being nobody worth watching, climbed to the back where the null could sit unbothered, and learned the liturgy by watching it performed. The duels were fast and exact and a little brutal. 2 wizards in the circle, a referee with a timing glass, the gold lines reading the force of every exchange and posting it to the board overhead in real numbers, so the crowd could watch a standing shift point by point as it was won and lost. A 4th year named Abbott climbed 2 places off a clean disarm. A 7th year fell 4 badly, and left the floor with the particular blankness of a person doing the arithmetic of what the fall would cost him. Then the board cleared and posted a single name, and the tiers went quiet in the way crowds go quiet for the thing they actually came to see. Cash and roll came down to the circle the way weather comes down a valley. His opponent was a 6th year with a standing near 5,000, no small wizard, a boy who had spent years dragging himself up toward a high and respectable ceiling, and he took his mark with the bearing of someone who knew he would lose and intended to lose well. The referee turned the glass. The 6th year opened fast, a good aggressive flurry, 3 spells chained tight, the kind of opening that won most duels in the hall. Roll did not move his feet. He took the flurry on a shield that did not so much block the spells as decline them, and the gold lines under his stance flared white, and the board over the floor jumped, and Harry, watching from the back, felt the gap between himself and the top of the ladder reorganize into something with actual dimensions. Roll's shield was not stronger than Pike's, it was more finished. There was no waste in it, no flinch, no spare motion anywhere in the wizard at all, and when he answered one spell unhurried, the sixth year's shield broke like a held breath, and its owner went down inside the circle and stayed down, and the board posted the result, and Cash and Roll walked off the dueling floor with the unbothered air of a man for whom nothing had ever been at stake. Analysis unavailable, skill not yet acquired. Observation permitted, note what you can. The wizard you are watching has a ceiling. It is high, he lives very nearit. That is why he wastes nothing, he has nothing spare to waste. Everything he will ever be, he already very nearly is. Harry read it twice. Everything he will ever be, he already very nearly is. There was the whole shape of the war he was about to start, laid out in 2 windows. Cash and Roll was a finished wizard. He had climbed to the top of a ladder with a top, and he stood there now, polished and complete and as good as he would ever get, the brightest example in the school of exactly what a ceiling was for. And Harry, 31 levels into a quest with no objective, was a worse duelist than Roll in every way that could be measured tonight. Clumsier, slower, weaker, a rough thing nowhere near done. But Roll was finished and Harry was not, and that was not a small difference. That was the only difference that would ever matter again. One of them had arrived, the other had no destination, only a direction, and the direction was up, and the road did not end. He stayed in his seat a while after, turning Roll over the way he turned everything over. The finished wizard's whole game was economy. He never spent a motion he could keep, never threw power he could hoard, because a man who has lived on his ceiling has learned in his bones that there is no more where that came from. It made Roll formidable, and it made him, Harry thought, a little brittle, though brittle was the wrong word for someone who had just folded a 5,000 like a letter. Call it fixed. Roll had one excellent answer to every question, polished over years into something close to perfect, and he had never once in his life been made to invent a second, because the first had always been enough. Harry had no excellent answers. He had a quest with no objective, a stat line that changed every night, and a teacher made of cold arithmetic that fined him for repeating himself. Where Roll had depth, Harry had only slope. The day the two of them met in a circle, and Harry was already sure there would be such a day, the duel would come down to one question, whether he could climb faster inside a single fight than Roll could adapt, when adapting was the one thing Roll's whole capped life had never required of him. He did not have the answer. He set the question down in the place behind his sternum where the climbing lived, next to all the others, and went home to the room. He left before the next duel, down through the cloister with the crowd noise fading behind him, and did not let himself feel the thing that was trying to be felt, because feelings were slow and he had counting to do. The attention came that night in the room when he was too far in to notice it arriving. He had pushed past anything he'd tried before, chasing the silent shield through a moving drill. 4 dummies firing at once on a charm Hermione had grudgingly helped him rig, and the levels were coming and the windows were stacking, and his whole arm sang with the clean overdraw of a core working past where a core should stop. He was in that hour the most himself he had ever been, which is to say the most without limit, the most purely climbing, and somewhere in the rhythm of it the room got cold. Not ordinary cold, the light did not change and the dummies kept firing and the windows kept coming, and underneath all of it the temperature of the world dropped a degree the way a room drops a degree when someone has opened a door very far away in a very large house. Harry lowered his wand. The dummies froze mid-motion, obedient to a will that was no longer paying them attention. The window that came was not gold and not white. It was the gray of the stone almost, as though the system had reached for a quieter color than it usually allowed itself. Attention registered, negligible. You have been noticed, not by the school. By what? Harry said. His voice was very loud in the cold room. The window held, and for a moment nothing followed it, and then more text came, slower than any the system had given him, each line surfacing as though through depth. Ceilings are quiet. A capped wizard makes a small fixed sound, and the world is full of small fixed sounds, and nothing listens, because there is nothing in a ceilinged wizard worth the listening. You are not quiet. Every limit you break is a light turned on in a dark field. So far your lights are small, so far the field is very large and very old and mostly asleep. Continue. I will not tell you to stop, but you should know the price of being seen before you finish paying it. The floor you stood on was a lid. Lids are not put on empty things, and the thing a lid is for does not, as a rule, enjoy being uncovered. The cold lifted as quietly as it had come. The room warmed back to its dustless nothing. The 4 dummies released, finished the motions they'd been frozen halfway through, and a hex meant for Harry who was no longer standing there spat past him and scorched the wall. He stood in the warmth returning dark and thought about Hermione in the empty classroom, hours and a lifetime ago, saying you put a lid on a thing to keep something else from noticing what's underneath, and about a field very large and very old and mostly asleep, and about the fact that he had apparently already lit the first small lights of his life across it. He could stop. The thought arrived with the clarity all the true options had. He could leave the levels where they were, let the 31 be his secret forever, never enter the trials, never break another limit, dim down into the small fixed sound of a quiet capped life and let the field sleep on. He picked his wand back up. All right, he said to the system, to the warming room, to the very large field he had just been told was out there in the dark. Then I'd better get big enough to be worth the trouble before the trouble gets here. Acknowledged, said the system, and the dummies reset, and Harry Potter, level 31, ranked the weakest student in 400 years, went back to the only work that had ever felt like his, while somewhere out past the walls of a room that did not exist, in a field too large to see the edges of, a single small light burned on in the dark and was, very faintly, watched. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. The first rung you registered for the Ascension trials at a lectern in the entrance hall under the index board, where a bored seventh-year prefect named Alois Quirk kept the challenge book and the look of a person who had never once expected the job to require thought. Harry put his name down on a Tuesday morning with half the school watching, because half the school was always in the entrance hall between bells, and the entrance hall had learned that the Null was good for a laugh. Name, said Quirk, not looking up. Potter, Harry. The quill stopped. She looked up. She looked at him the way you look at a sound you're sure you misheard, and then she looked reflexively at the bottom of the board at the wagging arrow somebody refreshed every few days at standing. 280 of 280, and then back at Harry, and her face did the whole journey from boredom to disbelief, to the look of a person who has just been handed a story she gets to tell at dinner. When I enter the trials, that's generally what the book is for. You're a Null, I keep being told. You understand how it works. She set the quill down, settling in because cruelty is more comfortable seated. You name a challenge. The wizard you name can accept or defer, but nobody defers a Null. Accepting a Null is freestanding. You meet in the circle. The referee reads the exchange off the gold lines, and when one of you can't continue or yields or leaves the circle, it's called. Win and your standing moves up by the gap between you. Lose, and here the grin sharpened, and it moves down by the same, except you've got nothing under you, Potter. You're already the floor, so the only thing you can do in the trials is fall on your face in front of an audience and then be exactly where you started. There's no prize in it for you. There's no version where this goes well. I'm aware of the math, Harry said. Write it down. She wrote it down. She was grinning the whole time, and he let her because a grin like that was a gift, the grin of a person filing him under a story whose ending she was certain of, and certainty in other people was the most useful thing he owned. Who's your challenge? She said. He had thought about this with Hermione for 3 nights running, in the empty 4th-floor classroom that had become their planning room, and Hermione had been very clear. Not too high, she'd said, sketching the standing on a slate in her careful hand, because a Null beating a top ranker is a miracle, and miracles get investigated. Not too low either, because beating someone barely above you moves the board a single place and tells no story at all. You want a duelist with a loud mouth and a soft middle, she'd said, someone ranked high enough that beating him is a result, and arrogant enough that when he loses he'll insist you got lucky, and do half your lying for you. Zacharias Smith, Harry said. The grin flickered. Smith was a 5th-year Hufflepuff, ranked somewhere in the low hundreds, a duelist with real ability and a mouth that ran several lengths ahead of it. He was, in short, exactly the wizard Hermione had described, which was why Hermione had chosen him. Smith'll murder you, Quirk said, and wrote it down, and rang the little brass bell on the lectern that meant a challenge had been entered, and the entrance hall turned to look, and the laughing started before Harry had even left the lectern, rolling out across the flagstones. The famous Null had challenged a ranked duelist. The Null thought he could fight, pass it on. Harry walked out through the laughter and did not give them the face, and 3 floors up, in a room that became what he required, he spent the night learning 2 new ways to end a duel and breaking the limit on both of them, while a window counted in the dark. Challenge logged. Opponent Smith, ZACHARAS. Ceiling estimated 1,200. Your measured ceiling remains 4. The gap will be instructive. Hermione had turned the empty 4th-floor classroom into something between a war room and a laboratory, and she ran it the way she ran everything, with a slate and a piece of chalk and the assumption that any problem would surrender if you simply refused to be stupid about it. The danger isn't Smith, she said, on the second of the 3 nights, the standing chalked up the slate in her cramped columns, Harry's name at the bottom and a careful ladder of arrows climbing from it. Smith is a 5th year with a temper. You could beat Smith in your sleep, which is rather the problem. The danger is the index office. She tapped a line in the standards manual, which she had checked out of the library and annotated until it bristled with marker ribbons. Listen. Where a duelist's trial results are materially inconsistent with the duelist's measured ceiling, the office may, at its discretion, compel a rereading. Materially inconsistent. Do you understand what that means? It means if I win too well, they put me back on the gauge. It means if you win too well, they put you back on the gauge, Hermione agreed. And the gauge does not read luck, Harry. The gauge reads you. It read you at 4 because 3 weeks ago you were a 4. It will read you at whatever you are the day they drag you back to it, and the day they drag you back to it is the day everything you're hiding becomes a number floating over the great hall in front of the whole school in Dumbledore, and whatever the index office reports to in London. She underlined materially inconsistent twice. So you don't win well, you win badly. You win the way a clumsy person wins, by accident, in a fight you looked like you were losing. You give them a result they can explain without ever reaching for the gauge, because the moment they reach for the gauge, the game is over. This was the thing about Hermione that Harry had come to rely on more than any spell. She was the break he'd told her he didn't need. Left to himself, he would have walked into the circle and won cleanly, because winning cleanly was easier, and he was not, by nature, a patient liar. Hermione made him patient. She had read the small print of the cage and found the one clause that could undo him, and built the whole strategy around starving it. It also explains why nobody's ever done this, she went on, more to herself now, the way she talked when a thing was assembling in her head. Climb the ladder from the bottom, I mean. It isn't that a low wizard couldn't, in principle. It's that there's never been a low wizard who was secretly a high one. The system was built assuming the gauge is always right, so the one move that breaks it, being measured as one thing and being another, has simply never been available to anyone. Until you're not just playing the game well, Harry. You're the first piece on the board that the rules didn't account for. How do I lose convincingly while winning? Harry said. That's harder than it sounds. I've tried failing on purpose. I'm bad at it. McGonagall caught me failing too neatly. Because you fail like a competent person doing it deliberately, Hermione said. Real incompetence is specific. It isn't less, it's wrong. The shield comes up too late and in the wrong place. The dodge goes the way you didn't mean it to and saves you anyway. The disarm misses the hand and snags the sleeve. She'd clearly thought about this in detail because of course she had. You don't dampen yourself evenly. You make precise mistakes and you let the wind come out of the mistake instead of out of the skill. That's the whole art of it. It's harder than just being strong, which is exactly why the system is going to pay you for it. It did. He took the principal to the room that night and drilled it against the firing dummies, not winning but winning ugly, building a duel in which a clumsy nobody kept tripping into survival, and the windows came faster than they came for clean victories. Deception sustained under pressure, difficulty bonus. To fight below your capacity while winning is to fight two opponents, one of them yourself. The second is harder. The system pays for the second. He went to bed those 3 nights a little higher each time, and a little more sure that the most dangerous spell he was learning was not a spell at all. It was the art of being underestimated on purpose by experts while standing in the middle of the proof. The trial hall on the night of the duel held more bodies than Harry had ever seen it hold, because nothing draws a crowd like the promise of a public humiliation, and the school had decided this was going to be one for the histories. He came down through the tiers to the gold-inscribed floor with Ron at his shoulder saying every version of "Are you sure" that the language contained, and Hermione on his other side saying nothing at all, which was her way of saying she had said everything already and the rest was up to him. The crowd noise had a texture he was learning to read. Up high, where the younger years sat, it was pure carnival, the anticipation of a spectacle. Lower down among the duelists in the ranked, it was something cooler, the professional interest of people who fought for standing and did not understand why a 4 would volunteer to be hit. Zacharias Smith was already in the circle, stretching his wand arm with the loose theatrical ease of a person performing relaxation, and when he saw Harry he smiled at the tears rather than at Harry working the room. I want it on the record, Smith announced, that I tried to defer, out of mercy. They wouldn't let me, this was a lie, and the tears loved it, so try not to cry, Potter, it echoes in here. The referee was Madame Hooch, brisk and silver-eyed, and she walked the center line between them and recited the form. Sanctioned challenge, first to yield, to fall, or to leave the circle. No spell intended to maim or kill, the circle won't carry them anyway. The lines read everything. Wands ready. She raised her own. Begin. Smith opened exactly the way the primers said a ranked duelist should open against a weaker one. Fast and overwhelming. 3 spells in a tight chain meant to end it before it started. A stinging hex to make you flinch. A knockback to catch you flinching. A body bind to land while you were down. It was good. It was genuinely good, the chaining clean, the rhythm practiced. Against the Harry of 3 weeks ago, it would have ended the duel in 2 seconds and the histories would have had their laugh. Harry let the first spell come, and as it came, the system did the thing it had been promising. Live engagement, analysis threshold reached, skill unlocked, analysis, rank I, the world acquired an annotation. It was not sight exactly, and it was not thought, it was somewhere between, a reading laid over the duel like a second transparent page, and on Zacharias Smith the page said things. It said ceiling 1180, current output 1140, which meant Smith was fighting at 96% of everything he would ever have, throwing the chain at nearly the top of his life. It said in the half-second before each spell the faint pre-shape of where the spell was going, because a wizard's body tells you, the shoulder turns, the wrist cocks, the eyes flick to the target a beat before the wand follows. So Harry was not where the knockback went. He had already stepped an economical half-pace the way he'd watched roll not move, and the knockback crossed the air he'd left and spent itself on the circle's edge, and the gold lines flared and read it and posted the force to the board, and the body bind found nothing because there was nothing left to bind. The tears made a confused noise. This was not the script. The null was supposed to be on the floor by now. Lucky, Smith said the way Hermione had promised he would, and meant it, and reset, and that was the moment Harry understood the gift of the cover all the way down. Smith did not see a duelist. Smith saw a four who had flinched in a fortunate direction. So Smith did the thing a ranked duelist does when his opening fails against a weaker opponent. He assumed the failure was luck and threw the same caliber of attack again, harder, instead of doing what he should have done, which was wonder why the floor of the school was still standing. Harry fought him for 90 seconds and made every second of it look like an accident. He never threw a spell that looked strong. He threw weak-looking spells perfectly. A shield that formed late and small and exactly where Smith's hex was going, so it looked like Harry had barely scraped a block instead of having read the shot before it left the wand. A disarm that missed Smith's hand and clipped his sleeve, jerking the wand a few degrees off true at the instant Smith cast, so Smith's own reductor went wide and cracked the floor and looked, to the tears, like Smith had simply fluffed it. Harry losing his footing and going to one knee at the precise moment, a stunner came through the space his head had occupied, so that the dodge read as a stumble. He built Smith a duel in which Smith was beating a clumsy Lucky Null who kept, infuriatingly, not quite dying, and the tears watched Smith's composure come apart against an opponent who would not cooperate with the story. Smith tried to slow it down, which was the smart thing, the thing he should have done from the start. He stopped chaining and started setting, building a trap the careful way. A conjured tripline of force low across the floor meant to fold the Null's legs while a stunner waited overhead, the kind of patient to move that wins duels between people who respect each other. It was good thinking. It was wasted because the analysis page showed Harry the tripline forming a half-second before it set, a faint disturbance in the gold the way wind shows itself in long grass, and Harry stepped over a thing that was not visibly there yet, and let the wasted stunner sail through the space above a head that had ducked for no reason the tears could see. "Stand still," Smith said low and through his teeth, and there it was, the tell Hermione had promised, the ranked duelist's certainty curdling because nothing unmakes a careful plan like an opponent who appears to be winning by sheer dumb luck and won't stop. Opponent compromised. He will now spend power instead of thought. This is how stronger wizards lose to weaker ONES and why the system ranks patience above output. XP plus 120, Insight plus 2. Harry gave him 3 more seconds of the clumsy Lucky Null, a flailed shield here, a stumble there, each one read by the tears as another impossible reprieve, each one winding the spring in Zacharias Smith another quarter turn, until Smith had stopped fighting a duel and started trying with the whole of his offended pride to simply erase the thing that was embarrassing him in front of 200 people. And underneath, where no gold line could read it and no tear could see, the system counted. XP plus 90, XP plus 140, Control plus 3, XP plus 200. You are fighting AT a fraction of capacity and winning. This is harder than winning AT full. Note that the system pays for difficulty and deception maintained under pressure is difficult. Limit broken. The limit break did not announce itself in light this time, because Harry held it down, swallowed the surge the way you swallow a shout in a library, kept it behind his teeth and let only a thread of it out into a single spell at the end. He ended it on Smith's own momentum, the way he'd ended Pike, because a duel you win with the other person's strength is a duel nobody can credit to yours. Smith, furious now, abandoned finesse and came in with a heavy overhand knockback meant to simply swat the Null out of the circle, his whole ceiling behind it, 96% of everything Zacharias Smith would ever be, and Harry stepped inside it, caught the wandarm's line with a half deflection he had drilled 500 times in a room that did not exist, and turned all of Smith's borrowed 1,000+ points of force back along the angle it came from. Smith left the circle the way a cork leaves a bottle. He cleared the gold line, cleared the first tier of empty front row benches and came down in a tangle 6 feet outside the floor, and the gold lines, finding the circle suddenly empty of one duelist, flared once and went dark, and Madame Hooch's voice cut through a silence that had replaced the carnival entirely. Out of the circle, the challenge is Potter's. Nobody laughed. That was the thing Harry would remember, the absolute absence of the laugh, the entrance hall's favorite sound simply not arriving. 200 people who had come to watch a Null fall on his face watched, instead, a 5th-year ranked duelist get folded out of the ring by a boy with a measured ceiling of 4, and not one of them had a shelf to put it on. The board over the floor recalculated, and Harry's name, which had lived at the very bottom of 400 years of names, climbed, not far. Hermione had been precise about this too. Beat one mid-ranker and you move from 280th to somewhere around 240th, one rung, a single visible step, a result and not a miracle. but it climbed, and the wagging little arrow somebody kept refreshing at the bottom of the board had nothing left to point at, because the bottom of the board was somebody else now. That, Ron breathed when Harry came back up the tiers, was the luckiest thing I have ever seen in my life. He fluffed every shot. Did you see him fluff the reductor? How does a ranked duelist fluff a reductor? I don't know, Harry said. Lucky, I suppose. Hermione said nothing and looked at him, and there was the thing in her face that was not pity and was now also not entirely calm, the look of a person watching her own theory work exactly as designed and discovering that watching it work was more frightening than doubting it had been. Draco found him the next morning, which Harry had expected, because Draco could not let a thing like this stand any more than water could agree to flow uphill. He was waiting outside the great hall with Crabbe and Goyle arranged behind him, and he had clearly spent the night assembling his position, because he led with the strong form of his argument instead of the houseplant joke. Smith threw it, Draco said, obviously. I don't know what you paid him or what you've got on him, but a ranked Hufflepuff does not lose to a Null in front of the whole school by accident. It's the only thing that makes sense. So enjoy your little rung, Potter. Everyone with a brain knows what it's worth. It was, Harry reflected, a genuinely good theory. It was wrong, but it was wrong in exactly the direction he needed people to be wrong in, and Draco had not only arrived at it himself, but was now going to spend his considerable social energy spreading it. A bribed duelist, a fixed match, anything at all except a Null who could fight, because that last one did not fit on any shelf the wizarding world had built. You're right, Harry said. You caught me. I bribed him with my vast Null fortune. Draco's eyes narrowed, because agreement was not the response he'd loaded for, and a person braced for a denial does not know what to do when handed a confession he can't use. I'm going to enjoy watching this fall apart, he said, which was what people said when they had run out of the thing they'd actually come to say, and he took his furniture and went. Up at the staff table, through the open doors, Harry felt rather than saw the attention find him, and when he glanced up, Cassian Roll was watching him from the Slytherin bench, not with Draco's heat, not with the carnival appetite of the tears, but with the flat assessing stillness of a duelist studying tape. Roll held the look for exactly as long as it took to file something, and then returned to his breakfast, and the message in it was clear enough. The wizard at the top of the ladder had noticed a name moving at the bottom of it, and had decided provisionally to keep an eye on the anomaly. That was fine. That was, in fact, the plan. You could not climb a ladder in secret. You could only climb it behind a story so comfortable that nobody looked past it, and let the people at the top keep their eyes on you for as long as the story held, and be 3 rungs higher than they thought by the time it broke. The school's weather changed around him by degrees over the next days, and Harry studied the change the way he studied everything, as data. It did not become respect. That would have been too clean. It became confusion, which was more interesting and more useful. The students who had laughed could not quite stop, because the Null was still officially a 4 and a 4 was still funny, but the laugh had a question caught in it now, a hairline crack, because they had all heard about Smith or seen it themselves, and a story you have to keep explaining is a story that has started to leak. In the common room, the first years gave him a wider berth and a longer stare. Older Gryffindors who had spent a month not meeting his eye now met it and looked away first, which was a small inversion but an inversion, the board tilting a single degree. Ron handled it the way Ron handled everything, with loyalty that ran ahead of comprehension. I don't get it, he admitted one evening by the fire, turning a chess piece over in his fingers. 3 weeks ago you couldn't shield a stinging hex. Now you're putting Zacharias Smith into the 3rd row. I've watched you my whole life, mate, and I can't make those 2 things into the same person, and I've decided I'm not going to try, because every time I try I get a headache and you go quiet and do the wall thing. He set the piece down. I just want to know one thing, whatever it is, are you all right, like actually? It was the kindest question anyone had asked Harry in weeks, and it landed harder than any of Draco's cruelties, because Draco wanted nothing from him but a reaction, and Ron wanted only for him to be all right, and Harry could not give him the truth without making him a liability, and could not lie to him cleanly because it was Ron. I'm better than I've ever been, Harry said, which was true, and I'll tell you everything when I can, which was also true, and Ron looked at him a long moment and then nodded and reset the chessboard, because a friend who will wait at the bottom of any stair will also wait for an answer, and ask for nothing in the meantime but the company. Harry went up to the dormitory that night and lay in the dark behind his curtains, and added a column to the private ledger he kept of what the climb was costing, the one no window tallied, the distance from Ron, the hairline crack in Hermione's certainty that had not been there before the duel, a wizard at a staff table writing letters about him to London. And under all of it, very faint, the thing the system kept reporting from the dark field, the sense of having lit a lamp in a country he could not see the edges of, and of something in that country, very slowly, beginning to turn its head. Cassian Roll did not gossip and he did not gloat, and so when he wanted to look at the anomaly directly, he simply arranged to be where the anomaly was, which turned out to be the library late in the dueling theory section, where Harry had gone to read up on the next 3 names on the ladder. Smith is a coward, Roll said without preamble from the end of the aisle. He had a book open in one hand and did not appear to be reading it. Not in the duel, in the days since. He has told everyone who will listen that he threw the match, because being a duelist who throws matches frightens him less than being a duelist who lost to a 4. I find that interesting. I find you interesting, which I will tell you is not a thing I often find people. He closed the book. I have watched every duelist in this school. I know how each of them moves before they know it themselves. You move like none of them. You move like someone counting. Harry kept his face easy. Roll was not Draco. You could not deflect Roll with a shrug, because Roll was not performing for a crowd. Roll was gathering data the same as Harry, and the only thing more dangerous than a powerful enemy was a powerful enemy with your own habits. Maybe I just got lucky, Harry said. Maybe. Roll considered him with the flat, assessing stillness Harry had seen across the great hall, the look of a duelist studying tape. Here is what I have decided, Potter. I do not believe you are lucky, and I do not believe you bribed Smith, and I do not yet know what you are. But the ladder is a tree, and I am at the top of it, and everything that climbs a tree climbs toward the top whether it means to or not. So you will reach me, not soon, but you will. He turned to go and paused, and the last of it came over his shoulder without heat, which was what made it land. When you do not insult either of us by getting lucky. Come up the tree as whatever you actually are. I should like to meet it. He left, and Harry stood in the dueling theory aisle with 3 names on a slip of parchment, and understood that he had been handed something rarer than Draco's hatred or the school's confused laughter. He had been seen partway by the one person in the castle whose whole life was the study of how wizards fight, and the seeing had not produced contempt but a kind of cold appetite, the patience of a wizard at the top of a tree who has just watched something begin to climb. The summons came at lunch on a slip of parchment carried by a first-year too nervous to read it, and it said, in a looping hand Harry had seen on certificates and warning notices his whole school career, "The headmaster would be glad of your company this evening. The password is Sherbet Lemon. AD, he never just talks to people," Ron said, reading over his shoulder. "Dumbledore, he summons you when something's gone wrong or when he wants something. What's he want with you?" "I imagine," Harry said, "he wants to know how a Null climbed a rung," and folded the parchment, and did not say the rest of it, which was that the most powerful wizard alive had taken personal notice of him 3 weeks into the thing, and that this was either very good or the precise opposite, and that he intended to find out which. The gargoyle led him up the moving stair, and the office at the top was exactly as advertised by everyone who'd ever been in it. A circular room cluttered with whirring silver instruments, and the snoring portraits of old headmasters, and a red-gold bird on a perch that watched Harry come in with an interest the portraits lacked. Dumbledore sat behind the desk with his fingers steepled and his half-moon glasses catching the light, and the twinkle was on, full and warm, the grandfatherly lamp turned up to its kindest setting. "Harry, thank you for coming. Lemon drop, no, they're better than their reputation, which is more than most of us can say." He gestured to a chair. "Sit, please. I find I am curious about you, and I have learned that curiosity, left unfed, makes a man tedious." Harry sat, and as he sat, without deciding to, the way you can't unsee a word once you've read it, the analysis page laid itself over the most powerful wizard alive. It said in the calm clean type the system used for everything. Ceiling 8,900, current output resting 8,400. Harry kept his face where it was, 8,900. It was a vast number, nearly Roll's full ceiling, and Roll was the highest in the school, and Dumbledore was sitting at rest at 94% of it, the way the truly powerful sat, not because they were straining, but because at their scale even rest was an ocean. It was the highest number Harry had ever read, and it was a number, it had a top. The greatest wizard of the age, the victor over Grindelwald, the one name said to give Voldemort pause, lived 9/10 of the way up a ladder that, for him as for everyone else who had ever lived, ended, for everyone else who had ever lived. Harry sat in the cluttered office with the silver instruments whirring and understood, in a quiet that had nothing to do with the room, exactly what he was, not strong. He was not strong yet, not next to a resting 8,900. A single duel with Zacharias Smith proved nothing against that. What he was the only thing in the room, possibly the only thing in the country, possibly the only thing in 400 years, with no number at the top. Everyone he had ever met grew toward a line. Dumbledore had simply grown toward a line further away than other people's. And Harry's page, where the ceiling went, said the word it had said on the first night, the word that was not a number, the word that meant the question itself did not apply. "None. You won a trial," Dumbledore said pleasantly. "Against young Mr. Smith, who is, I'm told, no small duelist. The school is talking of nothing else." "I got lucky," Harry said. Dumbledore selected a lemon drop and considered it. "Do you know, in my experience, luck is a word people use for patterns they would prefer not to examine. A man wins once, it is luck. A man wins twice, it is a coincidence. A man wins a third time, and the wise begin to ask what he knows that they do not. The twinkle did not dim, but something moved behind it, the way a shape moves behind a curtain without disturbing the cloth. I have been headmaster of this school for a long time, Harry. I have seen a great many students measured. I have a certain feel for the shape of a young wizard's growth, the way a gardener knows by a glance whether a thing is rooted shallow or deep. And I confess that you do not fit the shape I would expect of your reading. You do not fit it at all. There it was, not an accusation, nothing so crude, a door held open, an invitation to step through it and explain himself, baited with warmth and the flattery of being found interesting by the most interesting man in the room. I've been practicing, Harry said. A lot. They told me my ceiling was 4, so I figured I'd better get all 4 points working. Practicing. Dumbledore smiled, and it was a good smile, a real one, and that was what made him dangerous, that the warmth was not fake. Yes, I'm sure you have. Diligence is a fine thing. It is in fact the finest thing and the most underrated, and if your climb is the fruit of diligence, then I shall be your loudest admirer. He set the lemon drop down untasted. But I will tell you what worries an old man, Harry, because I think you are the sort of person who would rather hear it plainly. There is a reason the world is built the way it is. There is a reason every wizard has a ceiling. The wizards who reached the very top of theirs, the ones who could go no higher and could not bear it, the ones who went looking for ways to climb past where a man is meant to climb, they are not in the histories under the heading of heroes. They are in the histories under the heading of warnings. Power without a limit is not a gift, it is a kind of weather, and weather does not love the things that live beneath it. You're describing someone in particular, Harry said. It was a risk, pushing back, but a boy who only ever absorbed would look like a boy with something to hide, and curiosity was the safest disguise there was. The warnings in the histories, the wizards who climbed past where they were meant to, you're thinking of one of them right now. Something passed over Dumbledore's face, there and gone, the cloud shadow of a memory he kept somewhere with a lock on it. I am thinking of several, he said. It is the cost of a long life that one accumulates examples, but yes, there was a man I knew once very well who believed, as you might be tempted to believe, that limits were insults, that a sufficiently great wizard owed it to the world to become as great as he could and let the world arrange itself around him. He was the most brilliant person I have ever known. The twinkle was wholly gone now, and what sat in its place was old and tired and without any warmth at all. I spent the back half of my life undoing what he became. So when I tell you that the ceiling is a mercy, Harry, I am not reciting a school motto. I am telling you something I paid for in full. And if a wizard didn't choose to climb past his limit, Harry said carefully, if he were simply born without one, would that wizard be a warning too, or only unlucky? For the length of a breath the office was very still, the silver instruments whirring, the red-gold bird watching with its bright, unblinking eye, and Harry understood he had pushed exactly one question too far, because the regard Dumbledore turned on him then belonged to a man who has just heard, in a phrasing too precise to be accidental, the confirmation of the thing he had summoned a student here to disprove. That, said Dumbledore softly, is a very particular question. He let it hang. Then the lamp came back on, gentle and grandfatherly and complete, and the dangerous moment folded itself away. It would depend, I should think, entirely on what the wizard did with the gift, and on whether he had the wisdom to accept help in carrying it. Few of us are wise enough to carry great weight alone. The ones who try are precisely the warnings we have been discussing. He let that sit, and the silver instruments whirred, and the bird on the perch shifted its feet. I don't have any limits to climb past, Professor, Harry said, and looked the most powerful wizard alive directly in his resting 8,900, and lied with the part of his face that had spent 4 years learning how. I'm a 4, you said so yourself. The whole school said so. I just got lucky. For a moment, a single unguarded moment, the warmth went out of Albus Dumbledore's eyes, and what was underneath was not unkind, but it was not warm either. It was the patient, weighing, faintly sorrowful regard of a man looking at a problem he had hoped not to be handed in his lifetime and now suspected he had been. Then the lamp came back on. Of course, Dumbledore said. Luck, well, do come to me, Harry, if your luck should ever begin to frighten you. Old men are good for very little, but we have seen a great many things end, and there is value sometimes in the company of someone who knows how the story usually goes. He stood the audience over. Mind the third stair, it has a temper. Harry went down the moving stair with the analysis page still faintly burning at the edge of his sight ceiling, 8,900 in his own where a number should be, saying none, and he understood 3 things he had not understood going up. The first was that Dumbledore did not believe the luck for 1 second. The second was that Dumbledore was not going to expose him, not yet, because exposing him would mean explaining to the world that ceilings could be broken, and that was the last thing the keeper of the cage wanted the prisoners to learn. And the third, the one that sat coldest, was the thing he'd read on the page. The greatest wizard of the age had a ceiling and lived near it and feared what stood above it in the dark. Harry had no ceiling and had been told there was something very large and very old that woke when limits broke and was climbing straight toward it on purpose. Dumbledore was afraid of the weather. Harry was the weather's own source, and a source has nothing to be wary of but itself, which meant he would have to supply the caution that no ceiling would ever again supply for him. Well, Ron said, waiting at the bottom of the stair with the loyalty of a person who would wait at the bottom of any stair Harry climbed. What did he want? He offered me a lemon drop, Harry said, and told me a scary story about the weather. That's it, that's it. Harry looked back up the stair toward the office where the most powerful wizard alive was, he had no doubt, already writing to someone about him. He's going to be a problem, he said mostly to himself, and then to the system in the place behind his sternum where it lived. How high is 9,000, really? How long until I'm there? The window came, clean and clipped and without comfort, the way he had come to need it to be. At your current rate of gain, measured against a fixed target of 8,900, sooner than he fears. But he is a fixed target and you are not, and the number that should worry you is not his. Something in a large dark field has begun to roll over in its sleep. Climb faster. Harry read it twice, standing at the bottom of the headmaster's stair with his loyal friend beside him, and a vast indifferent castle around him, and a number that did not exist where his ceiling should be. And then he put the window away and went to dinner, and ate under the enchanted sky like a boy with a ceiling of 4 and planned his next rung. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. In version A, board is a kind of clock, and over 6 weeks Harry watched the school's clock run backward. He climbed it the way Hermione had drawn it, one careful rung at a time, choosing each challenge the way a chess player chooses a trade, never the obvious capture, always the one that improved his position without alarming the room. He beat a 6th-year Ravenclaw ranked 190 and let it look like the Ravenclaw had overreached. He beat a 7th-year Slytherin ranked 140 and let it look like the Slytherin had underestimated him, which had the advantage of being true. He took a 4th-year prodigy named Vance who fought clean and fast and gave him the hardest 20 seconds of the run, and he beat her too, and gave her afterward the one honest thing he allowed himself in those weeks, which was a nod that said you were good, that was real, sorry about your standing. The hardest of the early rungs was a 7th-year named Selwyn, a Slytherin ranked just inside the top 100 who fought the way a closed-door fights, all defense, no openings, the kind of duelist who did not beat you so much as wait for you to beat yourself. Selwyn had clearly heard the whispers and decided to end them by refusing Harry the one thing every Potter duel had needed, which was an opponent who overcommitted. He gave Harry nothing. He stood behind a shield and waited, patient as stone, and for 90 seconds the gold lines barely moved and the tears grew restless, and Harry understood, with the system counting his frustration as difficulty, that he was being shown the early shape of the lesson roll would teach him properly a fortnight later, that there are wizards you cannot simply outpour, wizards you have to outthink. He won it in the end, but he won it ugly in a way that was, for once, not on purpose. He overloaded Selwyn's patient shield not with cleverness but with sheer rising output, hammering it until it broke the way a flood breaks a dam, and the system, even as it paid him, told him the truth. You won like a landslide wins by being larger than the thing in its way. This will stop working. The wizards at the top are not in your way. They are waiting beside the road with knives. The school noticed the landslide. After Selwyn, the treatment shifted in a way Harry could feel in the corridors, a current changing direction. A 3rd year he had never spoken to stopped him by the stairs to ask, in the hushed voice of someone requesting a forbidden thing, whether Harry would look at her shield charm and tell her what she was doing wrong. A pair of Hufflepuffs who had laughed loudest after the reading now went quiet when he passed, not out of cruelty withdrawn but out of a wariness that had replaced it, the wariness people reserve for things they have misjudged and are recalculating. Ron watched all of it with the proprietary alarm of a person whose friend was becoming a rumor in real time. They're scared of you now, Ron said, not as an accusation, as a weather report. Half of them, the other half want to be you. A week ago they were drawing arrows pointing at you on the board, and now there's a 4th year who started a betting pool on how high you'll go, and the odds keep moving, and nobody's brave enough to bet against you, which is its own kind of answer. He shook his head. I don't know what you're anymore, mate. I just know I'd rather be standing next to it than across from it. Each wind moved his name. Not far, never far, but the board did not forget, and a name that moves in only one direction draws the eye whether it hurries or not. By the end of October, the entrance hall had a new habit. People checked the bottom of the board the way you check a wound to see if it's still bleeding, and every time they checked, the bottom had a different name on it because the bottom was not Potter anymore. Potter was the 80s. Potter was the 70s. Potter was a thing the board did, a slow, steady upward crawl that the whole school had started to watch the way you watch a tide you have been assured cannot come in. There was a loneliness to it he had not expected. He had imagined, that first night in the corridor, that climbing would feel like winning, that each rung would land the way he'd pictured the laughter dying in their throats. It did not feel like that. It felt like being slowly translated into a rumor. The Harry who had eaten toast and lost at chess and been ordinary in 100 forgettable ways was being overwritten, name by name up a column of slate, into a thing the school discussed in lowered voices, and the strange part, the part he turned over on the nights the room left him too spent to sleep, was that the rumor was closer to the truth than the ordinary version of him had ever been, and still it was not him. They had traded one wrong story about Harry Potter for another. The first had called him nothing, the second had begun to call him dangerous. Neither had ever thought to ask what it was like to be the only person in 400 years for whom the word ceiling did not point at anything at all. The word for it went around the way the word null had gone around, except the new word was a question. Lucky, they had said after Smith. Fixed, Draco had said, and a few had believed him. But you could call one duel luck and two duels a coincidence, and Dumbledore himself had told Harry what the wise begin to ask after the third, and the school was past 3 now, the school was past a dozen, and somewhere in the crowd the comfortable explanation had started to wear through, and underneath it was a colder thing that nobody wanted to say out loud, which was, what if the gauge was wrong? Hermione brought it to him in the war room, the 4th-floor classroom, where the slate now held a forest of arrows all pointing one way. "You're going too fast," she said. It was not a complaint, it was a measurement. I know, you're being careful, you lose ugly, you win by accident. Every single duel has a story that doesn't require the gauge, and it's working on each one individually. But the pattern, Harry, there's no luck-shaped story for the pattern. 12 wins in a row by a 4. The individual lies are perfect and the sum of them is impossible, and people have started to add. She set down the chalk. The index office posts rereading schedules monthly. You've climbed 80 places in 6 weeks. The next schedule comes out in 11 days. I would put money I do not have on your name being on it. How much warning would I get? From the schedule, a week, maybe less. She looked at the forest of arrows. I'm not telling you to stop. I gave up telling you to stop around the 3rd rung. It's like telling water to be a different shape. I'm telling you the clock that was always going to ring is about to ring, and when it does, the 4 floating over the Great Hall is going to become whatever you are, and you should decide now, while it's still a choice, whether you want to be standing where they put you when that happens, or somewhere of your own choosing. Harry looked at the arrows all climbing and thought about the gap he had decided to make his home, the gap between what he was and what they thought he was, and about how that gap was now, by Hermione's arithmetic, 11 days from closing whether he liked it or not. Then I want one more rung before it rings, he said. A big one, loud enough that when the truth comes out on my terms and not theirs. Hermione had known him long enough to hear the name before he said it. Going to challenge Malfoy. He's been telling the whole school I'm a fraud for 6 weeks. He's ranked 5,500. Beating him isn't a rung, it's a statement. Harry almost smiled. And he'll never defer, his pride won't let him. He'll stand in that circle and lose in front of everyone he's ever performed for, and then there will be exactly one person left at Hogwarts insisting it was luck, and it'll be him, and nobody will believe him because nobody believes the one who lost. That, said Hermione, is either the smartest thing you've said all term or the most reckless, and I genuinely cannot tell which, and I think that's the problem with you in one sentence. Draco accepted the challenge within the hour, which Harry had counted on, because Draco Malfoy could no more decline a public duel with his favorite target of 6 weeks than he could decline to breathe. He accepted it loudly in the Great Hall, standing up at the Slytherin table to do it, turning the acceptance into a performance the way he turned everything into a performance. Finally, he announced to a hall that had gone quiet to listen, "The fraud wants to test his luck against an actual wizard. Wonderful, I accept. I want everyone here Thursday night, because Thursday night you're going to watch 6 weeks of nonsense end the way nonsense always ends, with Potter on the floor where the gauge says he belongs." He looked down the hall at Harry, and there was real heat in it now, not the lazy cruelty of the houseplant joke, but the genuine grievance of a person whose worldview had been under siege for 6 weeks. "Luck runs out, Potter. Mine never has. Let's find out whose is whose." The tears on Thursday held the whole school and half the staff. Harry came down through them with the noise breaking over him, and this time the noise had no carnival in it at all. This time it was the dense electric hush of people who do not know what they are about to see, which was new, which was, he understood, the sound of the cover finally beginning to fail. He read the room as he walked it. He had analysis at rank III now, and it gave him the tears in a wash of numbers, ceilings hanging over every head like price tags, and the numbers told him a story Hermione had already told him in words. The school no longer thought this was funny. The school thought this was a question with the answer about to arrive. Draco was in the circle, and analysis laid his page over him in the clean type. Ceiling 5,540. Current output 5,510. Draco was fighting at the very top of himself, 99%. Everything Draco Malfoy would ever be poured forward into this one duel because he could not afford to lose it, and that, Harry thought, was the whole tragedy of a ceiling in a single number. Draco had brought everything. Draco had nothing else to bring. Draco had been everything he was going to be since the day he was born, and the only thing the next 60 years would teach him was how it felt to live at the top of a number that did not move. And Harry's own page, when he let the system turn it on him, said the thing it had started saying 3 weeks ago, the thing that was the entire point. Current output 4,300 and rising. Ceiling none, 4,300 against 5,500. He was outgunned. On paper, on the gold lines, in raw measured force, Draco Malfoy was the stronger wizard and would be for the first part of the duel, and any honest accounting of the two of them at the sound of begin would have Draco the favorite. Except Draco's number was a wall and Harry's number was an arrow, and the difference between a wall and an arrow is what happens when you ask them both for more. "Wands ready," said Madame Hooch. "Begin." Draco did not waste the advantage. He came out at full output, no testing, no feeling out, a duelist who knew he was the stronger and intended to use every point of it before the lucky little fraud could conjure another accident. He opened with a conjunctivitis curse to blind, rolled it straight into a bludgeoning hex to break, and put behind both of them the whole of his 5,500, and the gold line screamed white and the board over the floor leapt, and the tears made the sound a crowd makes when it sees a thing land that it expected to land, because it landed. That was the part Harry had planned and the part that still cost him. He did not dodge the opening. He took it on a shield and let the shield buckle, let it visibly buckle, let 4,300 points of Harry meet 5,500 points of Draco, and lose the exchange the way the weaker wizard is supposed to, driven back 3 steps with his shield cracking like river ice, and the tears roared because this was the duel they'd been promised, the fraud was folding, the gauge was right after all. "You are losing on purpose again," the system observed, counting even now. "He is stronger. For 19 more seconds, at this rate, he will remain stronger. The question is not whether you can endure 19 seconds. The question is what you become during them." Harry endured them. He gave Draco 19 seconds of a wizard being beaten by a better one, absorbing, retreating, shielding late, and the whole time Draco poured it on at 99% of everything he had, spending his wall as fast as he could spend it, and the whole time the system counted the difficulty of surviving a stronger wizard while pretending the survival was luck, and the counting was a flood, the richest seconds of XP Harry had ever earned. Because there is no teacher on earth like a stronger person genuinely trying to put you down. XP plus 400, XP plus 600, resilience plus 4, XP plus 900, level up, level UP. Current output 4,800, 5,100, 5,300. He was climbing inside the duel. That was the thing no ceilinged wizard had ever done, and the thing Draco's whole strategy could not account for, because Draco had been taught, as everyone had been taught, that a duelist is a fixed quantity, that the wizard who walks into the circle is the wizard who walks out, weaker or stronger but never ever larger. Draco was fighting the Harry of 19 seconds ago. He did not know to fight any other because no other had ever existed. At second 20, Harry's rising output crossed Draco's fixed wall, and the duel turned over like an hourglass. Draco felt it before he understood it. He threw the same bludgeoning hex that had driven Harry back at the start, the exact same 5,500 points, and this time the shield it met did not buckle. This time the shield held, flat and bright and contemptuous, and the hex splashed off it and lit the gold lines, and the board posted the force, and the number was the same as before. Draco had not gotten weaker. Draco had simply met, for once, something that had grown stronger than him while he watched. The tears stopped roaring. Into the new quiet, Harry stopped pretending. He had promised Hermione he would keep some cover even here, would win by a margin a generous person could still call luck, and he kept the promise for exactly one more exchange, and then he looked at Draco Malfoy, who had spent 6 weeks calling him a fraud, who was standing at the absolute summit of everything he would ever be, and discovering it was not enough, and Harry decided that some statements are worth their price. He did not blind Draco or break him or throw him out of the ring on his own momentum. He did something quieter and far worse for a person like Draco. He walked forward into the teeth of Draco's full output, threw a stunner and a cutting curse and a second bludgeoner that would each have ended any other duel in the school, taking them on a shield that no longer buckled at all, closing the distance with the unhurried economy he had studied for 6 weeks in a wizard at the top of a tree, until he was close enough to reach out, and he caught Draco's wand wrist in his hand, and he held it, and he let Draco feel through that grip the simple physical fact of being completely and effortlessly overpowered by a 4. Limit broken, current output 5,900, ceiling none. Yield, Harry said very quietly so that only Draco could hear it. Or I take the wand and you explain to the whole school how the fraud disarmed you with his hand. Your call, I'd think about your luck before you answer. Draco yielded. He said the word with his jaw locked and his eyes bright with something that was past anger and into a country anger only borders, and Madame Hooch called it, and the board recalculated, and Harry Potter's name jumped from the 80s to the low 20s in a single line, and the trial hall sat in a silence so complete that Harry could hear the gold circles humming as they cooled. He had wanted a statement. He had it. He had also, he understood as he climbed back up through tears full of faces that no longer had any shelf at all to put him on, just spent the very last of the cover. There was no luck-shaped story for what they had watched. A 4 had walked through Draco Malfoy's entire ceiling and taken his wrist like a parent taking a toy. The clock had been going to ring in 11 days. Harry had a feeling he had just rung it himself. Ron was waiting up for him in the common room, alone, the fire down to coals, and Harry knew from the set of his shoulders that the easy years were about to cost their bill. "Sit down," Ron said, which Ron never said, and Harry sat. "I watched you take Malfoy's wrist tonight. The whole school watched. And I've spent 6 weeks telling myself stories, lucky, practicing late bloomer, whatever lets me keep my head down, because you're my best mate and I figured you'd tell me when you were ready and I didn't want to push." He turned to Cole with the poker. "But you walked through Malfoy's whole ceiling like it was weather, Harry, and there's no story left that I can tell myself that makes that all right, so I'm done telling myself stories. I'm asking. And I'd like the truth because I've earned the truth, and because if I'm going to lose you to whatever this is, I'd at least like to know what it is I'm losing you to." It was not the question Hermione would have asked. Hermione asked how. Ron asked what it was costing and whether Harry was still in there, and those were the questions that were harder to deflect because they were not about the magic at all. So Harry told him. Not the way he'd told Hermione, the theory and the laws and the windows, but the shape of it, the thing under the thing. That there was no ceiling, that there had never been a ceiling, that he was climbing towards something he could not see the top of because there was no top, and that a very old and very dangerous thing had begun to notice, and that the wizard with the mark in the sky had begun to notice too, and that Harry had refused the headmaster's offer to make him safe because safe was a story and the story was ending. Ron took it the way Ron took everything that mattered, with a long silence and then a complete, unhesitating loyalty that cost him nothing because he had decided the price long ago. "Right," he said when Harry had finished. "Well, you're an idiot for not telling me sooner, and I'm an idiot for not making you, and we can sort out whose idiot is bigger later." He set the poker down. "What do you need? Don't say nothing. You're rubbish at nothing. What do you need from me? Because I'm not built for the wand stuff, I know that. I've got a respectable 4,000 and a ceiling I can see from here. But I'm built for some things, so tell me which ones and I'll do them, and we'll not talk about the rest until you can." And Harry, who had spent 6 weeks measuring everything he was losing, found that the column had a credit in it he had not counted, and that the credit was sitting across from him by the dying fire asking how to help. "Just keep being the one who waits at the bottom of the stair," Harry said. "It turns out that's the rarest thing there is." Cassian Roll was waiting for him at the top of the tiers. He did not say congratulations. He fell into step beside Harry in the cloister outside, where the night air came cold off the lake and the noise of the hall faded behind them, and they walked for a while in the particular silence of two people who both know the conversation has not started yet. "That was the most honest dueling you've done all term," Roll said finally. "The walking through his output, that was real. Everything before it was theater, and good theater, I'll give you that, but that last part was you." He stopped at a place where the cloister opened onto the dark grounds. "I want to show you something, not a trial. The trials are for the board. This is for you and for me, and it costs you nothing because it won't be witnessed and it won't be recorded. I want to duel you properly. Now." Every careful instinct in Harry said no. An unwitnessed duel with the top of the school in the dark, where nobody would see whatever he became, gave away information for nothing and could end with an injury he'd have to explain. He should have said no. He said yes because there was a hunger in him that the careful instincts had never quite been able to govern, and the hunger wanted to know the one thing the whole climb had not yet told him, which was where he actually stood against the best, with no theater and no cover and nothing held back on either side. He found out in 11 seconds. Roll did not open the way Draco had opened, did not pour everything forward to overwhelm. Roll opened with nothing, a single feint, a half-cast that Harry's analysis read as a stunner, and that turned in the reading into the truth, which was that Roll had cast nothing at all and watched to see how Harry reacted to a threat that wasn't there. Harry shielded a spell that did not exist, and in the half-second his shield cost him. Roll was somewhere else, and the duel was already lost. Harry simply hadn't been told yet. It was not that Roll was stronger, though he was 9,000 against Harry's cooling 5. It was that Roll wasted nothing and predicted everything. Where Draco had thrown his whole ceiling at a fixed target, Roll spent his like a miser, a spell only when a spell would land, a step only when a step would matter, reading Harry the way Harry read everyone else, except that Roll had been reading duelists since before Harry could shield a stinging hex, and against that much economy Harry's rising number was a sledgehammer swung at a man who simply was not standing where the hammer fell. Harry climbed, even losing. The system saw to that, the richest opponent he had ever faced pouring XP into him even as Roll dismantled him, and Harry's output rose 6,000, 6,200, but rising was not enough, because Roll did not give him the 19 seconds Draco had given him. Roll ended exchanges in 2, and you cannot outclimb a man inside a fight he refuses to extend. It ended with Harry on one knee, his wand 10 feet away, Roll's wand lowered because there was nothing left to point it at. Assessment, defeat, note this. You have been told growth FEDSON difficulty. Here is the difficulty you cannot level past in a single night. He is not merely stronger. He is finished and being finished. He has spent years learning the thing you have been too busy climbing to learn. That most power is wasted, and the wizard who wastes none beats the wizard who has more. Your ceiling is none. That will win you every long war. It will not win you a short one against a master. Learn economy or remain a sledgehammer, and pray your enemies are always WALLS. You're going to be the strongest wizard this school has ever produced, Roll said, retrieving Harry's wand and handing it back hilt first, with the courtesy of a man who took winning too seriously to gloat about it. Possibly the strongest it ever will. I have no idea how, and I've stopped needing to know. But strong isn't the same as good, Potter, and right now you're a giant who fights like a giant, and giants lose to people who fight like surgeons until the day the giant learns to hold a scalpel. He turned to go back toward the castle. Come find me when you want to learn the scalpel. I'll still beat you, but you'll make me work for it, and I find I want that, which is the strangest thing that's happened to me all year. Harry knelt in the cold cloister with his wand back in his hand and his pride somewhere out on the dark grounds, and did the thing he was best at, the thing that had kept him alive through 4 years of being underestimated, and would keep him alive through whatever came next. He gathered the data. He had been beaten, not by a bigger number, by a better wizard, and the gap between those two things was the only map he had left worth following. He went to the room the next night and asked it for a smaller war. It gave him a single dummy this time, not the firing line, one armored figure charmed to a setting he had never used, the one the primers called Master, the setting that did not attack in patterns but adapted, that learned your habits within a fight and punished them, the closest a straw man could come to a thinking opponent. He set it to Master, and he stopped trying to win by being large. It was the hardest training he had done, harder than the limit breaks, because every instinct he had built over 6 weeks was the instinct to pour, and economy was the discipline of not pouring, of letting a spell go only when it would land, of standing still when standing still was the stronger move, of fighting like the surgeon Roll had named instead of the giant Roll had beaten. He lost to the dummy 9 times. The system did not comfort him. The system counted, and what it counted slowly was a new kind of gain, not power, not output, but a number in the control column that had been climbing all term and now began to climb steeply, because he was finally asking it the question it had been waiting for. Good. You have spent this term learning how much you can do. You are now AT last, learning how little you need to. These are not the same skill. The first made you strong, the second will make you dangerous. Hermione found him there at 2 in the morning, because she had finally made him show her the room, on the grounds that a break she could not see was no break at all, and she came in with a newspaper instead of a slate, and her face had the particular stillness it took on when she had stopped finding something interesting and started finding it frightening. You should see this, she said, and put the Daily Prophet down on the floor beside the master dummy, and the headline read third disappearance in a month, Ministry URGES calm, and underneath it, in the smaller type that always carried the truer news, a column listing names and a phrase Hermione had circled in the same chalk she used for the standing. Read the circled part. Harry read it. The ministry was attributing the disappearances to a coincidence of unrelated causes. A single named source, unattributed, disagreed, and the disagreement was 1 sentence long. Witnesses at 2 of the 3 sites reported a mark in the sky, which the ministry has declined to describe. A mark in the sky, Hermione said quietly. They won't print what it is, but everyone over the age of 30 knows, because everyone over 30 saw it the first time. He's back, Harry, properly back, not a rumor, not a frightened whisper in the staff room. People are vanishing, and there's a mark over the places they vanish from, and the ministry is lying about it the way they always lie about it, which is the surest sign there is that it's true. She looked at the master dummy, at the scorch marks, at someone who could fold Draco Malfoy with one hand and still not beat a straw man set to think. The system told you a man wants to meet you. I think we both know which man. And I think the question stopped being how high you can climb and started being how fast, because the thing you've been racing was never really the index office. Harry looked at the circled sentence and the master dummy waiting patient in the dark, and felt the 2 halves of his life, the school one and the other one, fold together into a single problem with a single clock. Confirmed, said the system unprompted, which it almost never was. The wizard has a name, you know it. He broke his own ceiling a long time ago, by a method that worked and cost him everything a person is. He is vast, and he is beyond, and he has never met anything that was not. When he meets you, one of those facts will have to change. Dumbledore did not summon him this time. Dumbledore came to him, which was worse, because a summons you can prepare for. He was waiting in the war room. Harry came in 2 nights after the roll duel to find the most powerful wizard alive seated at a student desk among Hermione's slates and marked-up manuals, examining the forest of upward arrows with the mild interest of a man reading another person's diary and not troubling to pretend he wasn't. Miss Granger has a fine analytical mind, Dumbledore said, not turning. This is excellent work, frightening but excellent. She has reverse-engineered the entire rule structure of the trials and found, I see here, the rereading clause. He tapped the slate where Hermione had chalked materially inconsistent and underlined it twice. She's quite right, of course. Your name is on the schedule. It posts the day after tomorrow. In 9 days, the index office will require you to sit the gauge again in the Great Hall before the school. He turned then, and the twinkle was there, gentle as ever, and underneath it the steel had stopped pretending to be anything but steel. I thought you should hear it from me, and I thought perhaps we might discuss what happens when the number above your head is no longer 4. You could cancel it, Harry said. You're the headmaster. You could pull my name off the schedule with a sentence. I could. Dumbledore folded his hands. And the question of whether I should is the reason I am sitting in a cold classroom at 10 in the evening instead of in my bed. Let me be honest with you, Harry, more honest than I am usually permitted to be, because I think you have earned it and because I think dishonesty would not survive contact with you for very long. He gestured to the chair across the desk, and Harry sat because you do not stand over a confession. There is an old enchantment, Dumbledore said, older than the school. Older than the ministry, older than the statute, older than nearly anything we have a name for. It was laid upon wizardkind a very long time ago, by people whose own names did not survive the laying of it, and its purpose was to place a ceiling on every witch and wizard born, so that no one of us could ever grow large enough to be a danger to all the rest. We call it the threshold accord, those few of us who are charged with keeping it, and the gauge is its bookkeeper, and the standing is its census, and the whole vast apparatus of measurement that you have spent this term making a mockery of exists for one reason and one reason only: to ensure that the accord is never broken, because the last time it came close to breaking, the world very nearly ended, and the time before that, by every account we have, it did. The silver light from the instruments Hermione had borrowed pooled on the desk between them. You have no ceiling, Dumbledore went on quietly. I have suspected it since the reading, and after Mr. Malfoy I no longer suspect, I know. You are the first wizard in 4 centuries, perhaps far longer, to be born outside the accord, and I do not understand how, and the part of me that is a scholar is on fire with wanting to. But the part of me that is the keeper of an enchantment older than my civilization is afraid, Harry. In a way I have been afraid only once before in a long and frightening life, because the accord exists to keep something from waking, and every limit you break is a knock on its door, and I do not think you understand yet how thin that door is, or what is on the other side of it, or how little either of us would matter to the thing that answers. It was the single most honest thing an adult had ever said to Harry, and he believed all of it, and that was exactly what made the next part so quietly terrible. So here's what I am asking, Dumbledore said. Let me bind you, not all the way, not back to 4, I would not do that to you, and I am not sure I could. But let me place a ceiling on you, a high one, higher than Mr. Rolls, higher than mine, a ceiling so distant you would never in an ordinary life come near it. You would be among the greatest wizards alive. You would simply also once more have a top, and the door would stay shut, and the thing behind it would stay asleep, and you would be safe, and so would everyone you have ever loved, and so would a great many people you will never meet. He spread his hands, and the offer sat between them, warm and reasonable and absolutely sincere. I am not your enemy, Harry. I am asking you to accept a limit so that the world may keep its mercy. Will you let me? And Harry, 15 years old, the weakest wizard in 400 years, the famous Null, sat in a cold classroom across from the greatest wizard of the age and the keeper of an enchantment older than nations, and felt the whole shape of his life narrow to a single fork, and gave the only answer the gap had ever allowed him. No, he said. Dumbledore closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them the sorrow in them was real, and so was the steel, and the two had stopped being separate things. Why, he said, not sharp, just tired. Help an old man understand. You have been given the keys to the kingdom, and I am offering you almost all of it, every height but the last, in exchange for a single wall you would never even reach. Why refuse? Because you can't tell me where the wall is, Harry said. You'd build me a ceiling at 9,000 or 20 or 100,000, and you'd swear it's so high I'll never touch it, and maybe you'd be right. But the thing you're so afraid of is coming whether I'm capped or not, isn't it? You said it yourself. Every limit I break is a knock on the door, but the door was always going to get knocked on because something put the lid on in the first place, which means there's always been a thing under the lid that wanted out. You've spent your whole life keeping a door shut. I've spent 6 weeks learning that I might be the only person ever born who could open it and survive what's on the other side. He leaned forward. You want to cap me so the world keeps its mercy. I think the world's mercy is borrowed, and the loan's coming due, and when it does, a capped wizard is just another thing the weather kills. I'd rather be the storm, I'm sorry. I know you're not my enemy, but I'm not going to let you make me safe by making me small. I've been small. It's not safe. It just feels that way until something decides you're worth eating. The most powerful wizard alive looked at the student with no ceiling for a long moment in the pooled silver light, and something in his face settled, the way a man's face settles when a hope he had not quite admitted to is set down at last. Then I cannot stop the rereading, Dumbledore said, rising. I find I no longer wish to. The school should know what is among them, and perhaps when they do, one of us will think of something I have not. At the door he paused, and for a moment he was only an old man, only tired, only kind. I hope you're right, Harry. I have spent 100 years being the one who was right, and I am so very weary of it, and I find that I hope tonight that the one who has no ceiling has seen something the old keeper has not. Because if you're wrong, the price will not be paid by you. It is never paid by the ones who break the door. It is paid by everyone standing behind them. He left. Harry sat alone in the war room among the upward arrows, and felt the data settle into its terrible new shape, and reached in the place behind his sternum for the one voice that had never once lied to him or asked him to be smaller than he was. How long, he asked it, until the door. The window came, and it was the gray window, the quiet one, the one the system used only when it was reporting from the dark field, and the words surfaced slow, as though through a great depth of cold water. The thing under the lid has stopped rolling over in its sleep. IT has begun to dream of doors, and something nearer, something that is only a man, has heard that there is a boy with no ceiling and has decided he wants to meet you. Climb faster. You are nearly out of time, and you have not yet learned the scalpel. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. The reading that broke. They reread him on a Friday, and the gauge did not survive the experience. The index office sent 2 officials up from London for it, gray people in gray robes with the patient officiousness of those who measure things for a living and have never once been measured back. They set up beside the gauge on its dais in the great hall the way undertakers set up beside a grave, and the whole school filed in to watch, because the whole school had been waiting weeks for this, ever since the bottom of the board had stopped being Potter and started climbing, ever since a four had taken Draco Malfoy's wrist in his hand in front of 200 people. Harry walked up the center aisle through a silence that had teeth. There was no laughter this time. The laughter had been spent somewhere around the 40th rung, and what had replaced it was the dense, electric, breath-held attention of people who know they are about to learn something and are not sure they want to. He could read the tears without trying now. Analysis at rank. IV painted the room in numbers, ceilings hanging over every head, and the numbers told him what their faces would not. The school had stopped believing the gauge, and it had come to watch the gauge admit it. Dumbledore presided from the staff table, hands folded, the twinkle dialed down to pilot light. He had not stopped the rereading. He had told Harry he no longer wished that the school should know what walked among them, and Harry had spent the week deciding whether that was mercy or strategy, and concluding, as he concluded most things about Dumbledore, that it was both, and that he had simply made his peace with not being able to tell the two apart anymore. "Mr. Potter," said the senior official, a woman with a clipboard and the bedside manner of a closed door. "You'll place your hand flat against the instrument and raise your magic to capacity. All of it. The gauge will find your ceiling. The procedure is identical to your first reading. Are you ready?" "Identical," Harry agreed, and put his hand on the cold iron and thought not quite. He had decided this with Hermione 3 nights running, the way they decided everything in the war room with the slate. He could sandbag the rereading. He could give it a 4 again, hold everything down, and walk out the Null one more time, and buy himself another month of the gap he had made his home. They had gamed it from every angle. And in the end Hermione had set down the chalk and said the thing they had both been circling, that the gap was already gone, that Draco's wrist had ended it, that a 4 who climbs to the 20s is not a Null anyone believes in, and that the only question left was whether the truth came out as a thing done to him or a thing he did. He had not slept the night before. He and Hermione and Ron had sat in the war room past 3, not planning now, because the planning was finished, just sitting with it, the way you sit with a thing you cannot change. Hermione had stopped arguing for the sandbag somewhere around midnight. "It was never really a choice," she said, scrubbing chalk dust off her hands. "I kept building plans where you stay hidden, and every one of them ends the same way, with the office dragging you back to the gauge in a month or 2 on their schedule in front of an audience you didn't pick, after you've climbed even higher and the lie is even bigger. There's no version where the secret survives the year, so if it has to break it yourself. Friday on the dais looking at them. At least then it's yours." Ron had said nothing for a long while and then said the thing that actually decided it. "Whatever number comes up, mate, I'll be the one clapping, loudly, obnoxiously. I've waited 6 weeks to see their faces, and I'm not letting the moment pass just because it's all so terrifying." And Harry had laughed, the first real laugh in days, and known that he was going to let them see, so he did it. He raised his magic to capacity, and capacity, for Harry Potter, no longer had a top. The silver wire along the bottom coil caught, the way it had caught the first time, a sullen ember glow. Then it climbed. It climbed past the first coil and the second, the way it had climbed for cash and roll, up through the register of teeth into the register of bone, and the senior official's clipboard lowered a fraction, because this was already wrong. This was already 4,000 years of wrong, a Null lighting the gauge like a ranked duelist. The wire reached the middle coils where Roll's reading had crested at 9,000 and did not crest. It kept going. It reached the top coil, the upper register the officials had recalibrated after Roll, the one built to hold the highest ceiling the school had ever produced, and it filled that too, white now, the whole apparatus burning like a struck match held against the dark, and the number in the air above the dais climbed past 9,000, past 10, past numbers the gauge had columns for, and Harry felt the door behind his sternum and did not close it, because he had decided this time to let them see. The instrument is trying to measure a thing that does not hold still, the system observed almost gently. IT is looking for your ceiling. It will look until IT breaks, because it was built by people who could not imagine a wall that wasn't there. The number stopped climbing not because Harry stopped, but because the gauge ran out of air above the dais to write in. The blue light scrawled itself to the enchanted ceiling and could go no higher, and for one suspended instant the whole great hall was lit blue from below, every upturned face painted the color of a number with no end, and then the silver wire asked for the one thing it had been built 400 years to swear was impossible, gave up. It did not explode, it was sadder than that. The wire simply unspooled all at once, the way a clock's mainspring lets go, with a long descending whine and a smell of scorched silver, and the great black iron body of the gauge cracked down one flank with a sound like a struck bell breaking, and the blue number guttered and died, and the apparatus that had measured every witch and wizard in Britain for 400 years stood on its dais smoking and silent, and in the most literal sense, beyond repair. Harry took his hand off the cold iron, which was no longer cold, and looked at the senior official, who was looking at her clipboard, which had nothing on it because the procedure did not have a box for this. "What do I put?" she said, not to Harry, to the room, to 400 years of certainty. "What do I write down?" Up at the staff table, Albus Dumbledore closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them he rose, and the great hall turned to him the way the lost turn to a lighthouse, and he gave them in his great calm voice the only true thing that could be said. "You write down," Dumbledore said, "that the instrument was insufficient to the task, and then I think we send the children to their houses and the rest of us have a great deal to discuss." Nobody laughed. Harry walked back down the center aisle through a silence that had changed its nature entirely, no longer the silence of a crowd waiting for a joke, but the silence of a crowd that has just watched the floor of its world crack down one flank in smoke. He did not give them the face. He had practiced not giving them the face for so long that it had become the truest thing he owned, and he kept it all the way to the doors, and only Hermione, falling in step beside him, and Ron on the other side, saw that under it his hands were not quite steady, because some thresholds you cross knowing that you can never walk back across them, and he had just burned the one between the Null they thought he was and the thing he actually was in front of the entire school on purpose. And there was no going home from it now. "Well," said Ron, "that's the secret out then." "That's the secret out," Harry agreed. "On the bright side," said Ron, "nobody's ever going to call you a houseplant again." The day the gauge broke, Hogwarts treated Harry Potter the way a town treats a river that has just jumped its banks, with a wary, calculating respect that had nothing in it of affection and everything in it of recalculation. He felt it the moment he walked into breakfast. The hall did not go silent, which would have been the old reaction, the reaction to a joke. It did something stranger, it adjusted. Conversations did not stop so much as lower. Eyes followed him without the cover of laughter to hide behind, and the long Gryffindor table, which a term ago had left a polite ring of empty seats around the Null, now had students leaning subtly his way, as though proximity to the thing that broke the gauge might be worth something, might rub off, might at the least be a story to tell. Harry sat down and buttered his toast and let them look, because he had spent a term learning to let them look, and the only difference now was that there was nothing left underneath the looking to hide. The two index officials had left for London at dawn, by all accounts in a hurry, carrying a clipboard with nothing on it and a report that would, Hermione predicted grimly, set off every alarm in the ministry's basement within the hour. "They didn't come to measure you," she said over the toast. "Not really. They came to confirm a standing for the records, and instead they watched the records themselves catch fire. Whatever they tell London, it won't be a number, it'll be a problem, and London's solutions to problems it doesn't understand have historically not been gentle." She did not have to add the other half. The ministry was not the only party who had felt a number with no end light the sky above a castle, and the ministry, for all its alarm, would not be the first to arrive. Cassian Roll found him in the courtyard at mid-morning, and for the first time since the library he did not arrive sideways, did not circle, did not perform the cool indirection that was his version of conversation. He walked straight up in front of everyone, which from Roll was itself a kind of announcement. "You let it break," Roll said. "The gauge, you could have given it a 4. You've given the whole school a 4 for a term, you're better at it than anyone alive. And you stood on the dais and let 400 years of certainty come apart in front of London because you decided the lie had run its course." He studied Harry with the flat, assessing stillness, but there was something new under it now, something that had not been in the dueling theory aisle. "I told you to come up the tree as whatever you actually are. I did not expect you to set the tree on fire to do it." A pause. "The offer stands, the scalpel. You are still a landslide that has learned 3 good manners, and a landslide is going to need to be a surgeon before the year is out, because the things coming for a boy who breaks gauges will not fight like Draco Malfoy." He turned to go, and the last of it came, as it always did, over the shoulder. I have decided which side of this I am on. It surprised me. Come to the trial hall tonight. I'll teach you the thing that beat you. You'll hate it, and you'll be better by morning." Tonight, Harry agreed and watched the most dangerous duelist in the school walk away, having appointed himself a teacher, and went to find Hermione, because a day that turned Cash and Roll into an ally was a day worth reporting, and because the war room was the one place in the castle where the looking stopped and he could be the problem instead of performing it. The attack came that night, which was not a coincidence, though it would be days before Harry understood exactly how little of a coincidence it was. He was in the room when it started, drilling the scalpel against the master dummy, when the system did something it had never done. It interrupted him, not with a window about his own climbing, but with the gray window, the one it used only for the dark field, and the words came fast and without their usual patience. "The wards of this school have been opened from inside, someone with a key. There are 9 wizards on the grounds who were not there an hour ago. They are moving toward the occupied towers. They are not here for the school. They are here for you." The reading was seen. A number with no end lit the sky above a castle tonight, and the wizard with the mark does not wait for things he wants. Harry was already moving. He came out of the room at a dead run with the master dummy still smoking behind him, and he hit the 7th floor corridor, and the screaming reached him from below, the particular thin screaming of children who have understood all at once that the castle is not safe, that it was never as safe as they were told, and he went down the moving stairs 3 at a time toward it. He found the first of them on the 4th floor. There were 2 in the black robes and the bone-white masks, and they had a knot of third years cornered against the wall outside the library, and one of the masked wizards had his wand up and was taking his time about it, savoring the way a certain kind of person savors a thing that cannot fight back. Harry read them both without deciding to. Ceiling 4,100, ceiling 3,800. Capped wizards, ordinary Death Eaters, foot soldiers, and the third years against the wall had ceilings in the hundreds, and the arithmetic of it was the simplest and ugliest arithmetic there was. He did not announce himself. He had stopped announcing things weeks ago. The first masked wizard was lifting his wand toward a sobbing 11-year-old, and then the wand was gone, not knocked aside but gone, ripped out of his hand and across the corridor and into Harry's. A silent disarm thrown with enough behind it to take 2 of the fingers that had been holding the wand along with it. And before the masked wizard had finished registering the absence of his hand's contents, Harry had put him into the stone wall hard enough to fold him down it in a boneless heap. The second one was better. The second one turned and got a shield up and a curse off in the same motion, a streak of sick green that Harry knew the color of from 100 warnings, the curse with no counter-charm, the one even Dumbledore could only dodge. Harry did not dodge it. He had learned the scalpel now, a little enough, and the scalpel said, "Do not meet the unmeetable thing with force, move it." And so he caught the green light not with a shield but with a twist of will that turned the air in its path to a hard curve of nothing. And the killing curse bent off true by 3 degrees and went past the screaming children and blew a window-sized hole in the library wall. And Harry crossed the distance and ended the second wizard the way he had ended the first, fast, without ceremony. The economy roll had beaten into him, spending exactly as much as the task required and not 1 point more. 2. There are 7. And then there is the 9th, who is not like the others, save the children. The 9th will find you regardless. "Go," Harry told the third years, who were staring at him with faces that would have been funny on any other night, the faces of children who have just watched the famous Null, the houseplant, take down 2 grown Death Eaters in the time it takes to gasp. Astronomy Tower, it's warded separately. The prefects know the password. Go now and don't stop and don't look back. Move. They moved. Harry went down toward the rest. The castle had become a thing he moved through rather than a place. He went down the shifting stairs against a tide of fleeing students, and twice more he found the masks before they found the children, and twice more he ended it fast, with the economy roll had beaten into him, spending only what the task required, because somewhere in the back of the climbing thing he had become was Hermione's voice saying "Careful, keeps your arms attached," and a newer voice under it, his own, saying "Careful, keeps theirs attached too." On the 3rd floor he found a knot of first years who had not made the tower, herded into a classroom by a 6th-year prefect who had planted herself in the doorway with her wand up and her ceiling. Analysis told him, all of 900, against a Death Eater with 4,000 who was taking his time about it. Harry took the masked wizard from behind, silent, no flourish, and the prefect stared at him over a body that had been one breath from being her death, and he did not stop to be thanked, because being thanked was slow and there were 6 more. And the thing he was learning tonight, the thing no trial had taught him, was that a duel fought for a board is a different animal from a fight you have for the people behind you, and the second one does not care how high you climb, only whether you arrive in time. He kept arriving in time all the way down, and the system counted it, and for once the counting felt less like a ledger than like a thing keeping faith with him, a tally not of his power but of the doors he reached before they shut. He found the war in the entrance hall, where the attackers had converged because the entrance hall was where the index board hung, and the index board was where, an hour ago, a number with no end, had been the talk of the castle. The order had arrived, or some of it, McGonagall in a tartan dressing gown throwing transfiguration like artillery, Flitwick small and terrible at the foot of the great staircase, 2 more masked wizards down already and 3 still up, and over all of it, in the cracked black slate of the index board, somebody had carved with a wand the thing the ministry would not print, the mark, the skull with the serpent tongue, burning a sick green in the stone above the smoking ruin of 400 years of names. And in the center of the hall, holding the order at bay almost idly, was the ninth. He was tall and gaunt and unmasked, with a duelist stillness Harry had seen only once before, in a cloister at night in Cash and Roll, except that where Roll's stillness was the economy of a man at the top of a ladder, this stillness was something colder, the stillness of a man who had stopped being only a man some time ago and had not enjoyed the trade. Harry read him, and the page hesitated, the way it never hesitated, and then it gave him the number, and the number was wrong. Ceiling 7,400, and then below it, where there had only ever been clean type, a second line the system had never shown him, tether detected, ceiling artificial, see note. Antonin Dolohov, said McGonagall, not taking her eyes off the gaunt wizard, her voice tight with the effort of holding her ground. He is past you, Potter. He is past all of us. Get to the tower. He's here for me, Harry said. If I go to the tower, he comes to the tower, and the tower is full of children. He stepped past her into the open center of the hall under the burning green mark, and the gaunt wizard's flat dead eyes found him and warmed very slightly with the appetite of a hunter who has been brought, after a long search, the thing he was sent for. The child who broke the gauge, Dolohov said. His voice was a dry rasp, a thing that had not been used kindly in years. He felt it, from wherever he is, a ceiling that wouldn't read. He has spent his whole long life looking for the door out of the cage, and tonight a child lit a lamp in the window of it, and he sent me to fetch the child. Alive, he said. He was very particular about alive. Dolohov raised his wand, and the appetite spread into something that was almost a smile, almost, on a face that had forgotten how. I find I am hoping you make alive difficult. Harry had fought Cash and Roll and lost. He had fought Draco Malfoy and won. He had fought a dozen ranked duelists in a sunken circle with gold lines reading every exchange. None of it had prepared him for Antonin Dolohov, because all of it had been a game, and this was not a game. This was the first time in his life that a wizard across from him was genuinely trying to end him, and the difference, he discovered in the first 2 seconds, was not in the spells. It was in the silence behind them. Dolohov opened with a curse Harry did not know, a slashing violet line that the analysis page could not name, only flagged danger. Unknown, and Harry moved it the way he'd moved the killing curse, bent it off true, and it took a chunk out of the staircase the size of a desk, and the stone screamed, and that was the moment Harry understood the shape of the next part. Dolohov fought the way the world's cruelty fought, without flourish, without performance, without any of the showmanship that had made Draco beatable, a man who had been killing for longer than Harry had been alive and had pared the work down to its essentials. They fought up the great staircase and across the first-floor gallery, and the castle came apart around them. Harry held. That was the thing McGonagall would describe later in a voice she could not keep level, that a 15-year-old held Antonin Dolohov, who had killed Aurors 3 at a time, who was reckoned among the deadliest wizards alive. Harry held him, and he held him by climbing, because every curse Dolohov threw was a question Harry had never been asked, the richest and most dangerous teacher the third law had ever offered him, and the system counted in a flood that had no bottom. XP plus 2000, XP plus 3400. This is the danger I promised you. It is also the fastest you have ever grown. The two are the same thing. They have always been the same thing. Current output 6,800, 7,100. But holding was not winning, and Harry's output was climbing toward Dolohov's 7,400 and not yet past it, and Dolohov could feel it, could feel the thing he had been sent for getting larger under his curses the way you feel a tide come up around your boots, and Dolohov did the thing the system had warned him about, the thing the second line on the page had meant. He reached for the tether. Harry saw it on the page. He saw the artificial ceiling, the 7,400 that was not Dolohov's at all, flex and draw, and somewhere far away, in a place that was not the castle, something vast and cold and divided answered the draw, and Dolohov's output, which should have had a top, climbed past it, 8,009, borrowed power flooding up the tether from a source that was not in the room, and the gaunt wizard who should have been spent through a curse with the strength of something far larger than himself. And it caught Harry across the chest and put him through the gallery wall into the empty classroom beyond, and the pain was the realest thing that had happened to him in his entire life. He lay in the rubble and the dust and could not, for a moment, breathe, and Dolohov stepped through the hole in the wall in no hurry at all, because alive did not require unhurt, and raised his wand over the student who had broken the gauge, and the system in the place behind Harry's sternum that had never once lied to him showed him the truth. Note, it said, and the words came in the Baroque register it kept for the largest things, the register Harry had only seen at the very edges of his climb. The wizard with the mark broke his own ceiling long ago. He did not do what you do. He could not. He was born inside the cage like everyone else, and when he found he could not grow past his wall, he did the only thing a caged thing can do. He broke himself into pieces and hid the pieces and bolted the stolen room of each piece onto the outside of his wall, so that his ceiling is not one ceiling but seven, lashed together, a vast and hideous scaffold around a man who is no longer whole. He is larger than you. Tonight, borrowing from all seven, he is larger than you can yet become, but he is bounded. Every piece he added cost him a piece of what he was, and there are no more pieces to add, and the scaffold does not grow. It only holds. He is the largest finished thing in the world, and you, bleeding in the rubble, outguned beaten, are the only unfinished thing that has ever faced him. The tether in this room is a thread of that scaffold. It is the first piece of him you have ever touched. Would you like to know what happens if you pull? Harry, on his back in the rubble with Dolohov's wand descending and his chest full of broken glass, did the only thing he had ever known how to do when the world told him exactly how high he could go. He went higher. He reached out, not with his hand, with the thing behind his sternum, the door he had spent a term learning to take off its hinges, and he found the tether where it ran cold and bright through Dolohov's borrowed strength, the thread of stolen room that lashed the gaunt wizard to a master far away, and he did not cut it because cutting was force and he had learned the scalpel. He pulled. He drew on it the way the system had taught him to draw on everything, with intent, with understanding, and the tether, which had been built to carry power one direction, from the divided master down to the servant, carried it, for one impossible instant, the other way. Limit broken. And the great hall of light he had made in a corridor on the first night was nothing, was a candle beside the thing that happened then. Harry's output, which had been climbing towards 7,000, did not climb. It detonated. Every limit he had ever broken broke again at once, a cascade, the floor under the floor under the floor giving way all the way down, and the borrowed power in the tether reversed and roared up into him. And for one instant that he would spend the rest of his life trying to describe and failing, Harry Potter was not a wizard with a number. He was the absence of a number, a thing the cage had no wall for, lit from the inside like a struck sun, an Antonin Dolohov, who had borrowed the strength of a divided god to break a child, found the strength running backward out of him faster than the tether could carry it, found himself, for the first time in decades, exactly and only as large as Antonin Dolohov, which was not nearly large enough. The curse died in his hand. Harry stood up out of the rubble, and the dust around him was not falling. It hung, caught in the wash of something pouring off him that had no name in any language the cage had been allowed to keep, and he looked at the gaunt wizard with the borrowed power draining out of him, and he did not kill him, because killing was easy, and the easy thing was almost never the right one. He took the tether instead. He held it the way he'd held Draco's wrist, the simple physical fact of being completely overpowered, and he let the far end of it feel him, let the divided master 100 miles away feel. For one heartbeat, down a thread meant only to command, the thing that had no ceiling, and then he severed it clean. And Dolohov dropped to his knees in the rubble of the gallery, hollowed, spent, a foot soldier again, and nothing more. And somewhere very far away, a vast cold divided thing recoiled from the touch of a child it could not measure, and knew, for the first time in its long and bounded life, something it had spent that life refusing to feel. He felt you, the system said very quietly in the gray register. I told you every limit you break is a light in a dark field. Tonight you did not light a lamp. Tonight you lit a beacon, and you lit it while holding the other end of a thread that ran straight into him, and he will not sleep again until one of you is finished. The war you wanted has a date now. It did not before. The aftermath of a battle is quieter than the battle and worse. They gathered the wounded in the great hall, under the cracked, smoking ruin of the gauge, which struck Harry as the bitterest kind of joke, that the instrument which had measured every wizard in Britain should end its life as a backdrop to a triage. No students had died. That was the thing they kept saying to each other, the staff in the hours after, repeating it like a charm, no students, saying it enough perhaps to make it a victory instead of a mercy they had not earned and would not be granted twice. 7 Death Eaters taken or dead, 2 escaped. Antonin Dolohov in a holding cell in the dungeons, hollowed and silent, and the Aurors who arrived at dawn agreed, somehow diminished, as though something had been taken out of him that they could not name. He found Ron and Hermione in the hall among the helpers, both of them whole, both of them having spent the battle doing the unglamorous, indispensable work the histories never record. Hermione organizing the older students into a chain that ran the wounded to the hospital wing. Ron at the doors counting heads against a list so that no child would be left forgotten in a cupboard, hidden and shaking, while the adults congratulated themselves on a victory. Hermione reached him first and did not say anything clever, which was how he knew the night had cost her something too. She looked at the healed but remembering line across his chest where Dolohov's curse had put him through a wall, and then she hit him once on the arm hard, which was the closest Hermione Granger came to weeping in public, and said, "You ran toward it. Of course you ran toward it. We are going to have a very long conversation about you running toward it." Ron arrived and said, "Put me down for that conversation. I've got points to add." And Harry stood between the only two people who had never once needed him to be larger or smaller than he was, and allowed himself, for exactly one breath, to be only tired. Harry sat against the wall of the great hall with a healed chest that still remembered the breaking, and watched Dumbledore move among the wounded, and understood that the lines had been drawn tonight in a way that could not be undrawn. The most powerful wizard alive came and sat beside him, eventually on the floor, an old man with bloodied robes and 100 years on his face, and for a while neither of them said anything. "I could not have done what you did tonight," Dumbledore said at last. "I want you to know that. I have dueled Antonin Dolohov. I have dueled the one who sent him. And when Dolohov reached for the tether, I would have had to retreat, and the children in the tower would have paid for my retreat, and I would have spent the rest of my life adding their names to a list I keep." He turned his head, and the steel and the sorrow had stopped being separate things entirely now, had fused into a single tired thing that was the truest face Harry had ever seen him wear. "You pulled the tether the other way. I did not know that was possible. I have kept the threshold accord for half a century, and I did not know a thing like you could exist, let alone do what you did, and I find that I am sitting on the floor of my own school beside a 15-year-old, and I do not know whether I have just watched the salvation of everything I have tried to protect or the beginning of the end of it." "You called it a scaffold," Harry said. "What he did to himself. The system showed me 7 pieces lashed around his wall." He watched the old man's face. "You've known what he is for years. That's what the accord keepers actually do, isn't it? You don't just keep the cage shut. You know exactly what it looks like when someone breaks out the wrong way because you've spent a lifetime studying the one man who managed it." Dumbledore was quiet a moment, and the silver instruments were very far away. "I have spent a great deal of my life," he said, "learning the precise architecture of what Tom Riddle did to himself. Yes. Because I believed, until tonight, that it was the only way the cage could ever be broken, and that understanding the wrong way was the nearest I would come to imagining a right one." He looked at Harry. "He tore himself into pieces because the wall would not move. You were simply born on the far side of it. Do you understand what that means in the cold arithmetic of a war? He is vast, but he is finite, and worse than finite, he is divided. Every piece of his scaffold is a piece he can lose. He has built his deathlessness out of 7 anchors, and an anchor is a strength only until someone learns that it is also a tether. Tonight, in a ruined gallery, a 15-year-old learned exactly that and pulled, and he felt it. The steel in the old keeper had turned now into something that was almost, despite everything, hope. He has spent 50 years certain his scaffold made him unkillable. You are the first thing that has ever made him wonder whether it made him a structure with 7 places to push." "Both," Harry said. "You taught me that. Everything about me is both. That's what having no ceiling means. There's no limit on the good and there's no limit on the bad, and the only thing that decides which is me, and you can't cap me into being safe. You can only hope I choose it." He looked at the old man beside him. "You still wish I'd let you bind me?" "With every part of me that is afraid," Dumbledore said, "which is a great deal of me tonight, and yet," he was quiet a moment, "and yet the children are in the tower alive because the thing I was afraid of walked into the entrance hall and did what I could not. I am too old and have been wronged too many times to trust my fear over that. So no, Harry, as of tonight, I no longer wish to bind you. I wish to help you if you will let an old man help, because the thing that felt you down that tether is going to come for you with everything it has left, and you are still, for all that you have become, a boy who has not finished growing, and the only question that matters now is whether you can finish before he arrives." Harry looked across the great hall at the cracked gauge, the dead instrument that had called him nothing, and at the green mark still smoldering faintly in the slate of the index board, the brand of a man who had broken himself into 7 pieces to escape a cage Harry had simply been born without, and he made the decision that the whole term had been walking him toward, the decision that was not really a decision at all because it had been made for him the first night in the corridor. When a voice had said the only kind thing anyone had ever said to him, which was, "There is no limit on you," "Then teach me everything you know," Harry said, "and get Roll to teach me the rest, and tell the Order to stop trying to keep me out of it. I'm done climbing in secret. The secret's burned. From tonight I climb in the open as fast as the danger will feed me, and I climb straight at him because he's the largest finished thing in the world, and I'm the only unfinished one, and that's the whole of the war in a single sentence, and we both already know how it ends if I just have enough time." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment in the wreckage of the hall among the wounded under the dead gauge. "Enough time," the old keeper said softly, "is the one thing I have never been able to promise anyone, but I will buy you what I can of it. And Harry," he rose slowly, every one of his 100 years in the motion, "when the day comes, and it will come soon, I should like to be standing beside you and not behind. I have spent my life being the one the others stood behind. I find tonight that I would rather stand beside the thing that has no ceiling than behind one more wall that does." He went to tend the wounded. Harry stayed against the wall and reached for the system in the dark behind his sternum and asked it the only question left worth asking. How long, he asked, until he comes. The window came, and it was the gray one, and the words surfaced slow and cold and certain. Sooner than you are ready, later than he wishes. He will spend the time between gathering what remains of his scaffold, because he felt tonight that it can be pulled, and he has never been afraid of anything that could not be counted, and you cannot be counted. Climb, you have stopped hiding, now stop holding back, there is no longer any reason for either. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. The scalpel and the scaffold. Cash and Roll taught the way a glacier teaches, slowly, with enormous pressure, and by grinding away everything that could not survive the lesson. They met in the trial hall after hours, the gold circles dark, the tears empty, and for the first week Roll did not let Harry throw a single spell at full strength. You don't have a power problem, he said on the first night after he had put Harry on the floor 4 times in a row using a tenth of his ceiling. You have the opposite of a power problem. You have so much that you've never had to think, and a wizard who has never had to think is a wizard who can be read, because everything you do bigger than you need to, and bigger is louder, and louder is a tell. He extended a hand and pulled Harry up. I'm going to teach you to be quiet. It will feel like being made small. It is the opposite of being made small. The quietest wizard in the room is the one nobody can predict, and the one nobody can predict is the one who wins. It was, Harry came to understand, exactly the discipline the system had been gesturing at since the second week. The third law turned inside out. The third law said growth feeds on difficulty. Roll's lessons were difficult in a way no firing dummy could be, because the difficulty was subtraction. Do less. Want less, spend a spell only when it would land, a step only when it would matter, and stand, the rest of the time, in the terrible patience of a wizard who has stopped needing to prove anything. The system paid him for it in control, the column that had limped along all term while power ran ahead, and now the two began to even, and somewhere in the third week of it Harry threw a stunner at Roll that Roll did not see coming, the first one all month, a spell with no wind up and no tell and no waste, and Roll took it on a shield and lowered his wand and said, there, that was a surgeon. Do that again 10,000 times and you might survive him. Skill unlocked, economy. Rank I, you have spent this year learning how large you can become. You are now learning the rarer thing, which is how little of yourself you need to spend to win. The first kept you alive, the second will keep the people behind you alive. Note, a wizard with no ceiling and no economy is a flood. A wizard with no ceiling and perfect economy is a scalpel the size of the sky. Become the second. The allies assembled themselves around the training the way iron filings assemble around a magnet, without anyone quite deciding it. Hermione came because Hermione could not stay away from a problem, and she turned the war room into a genuine campaign headquarters, a wall of the standards manual and the dueling primers and her own cramped theory chalked across 3 slates, and she did the thing that mattered more than any spell, which was think about what they did not yet know. Ron came because Ron came and discovered to his own surprise that he was the one who kept the team human, the one who noticed when Harry had not eaten or slept, the one who could make Cash and Roll, of all people, laugh once, a short, startled bark of a laugh that seemed to alarm Roll more than it pleased him. And Roll came because, he said, he had spent his whole life being the most interesting wizard in any room, and he found he preferred, for the first time, being the second most. The numbers told the story of those weeks better than Harry could. He had crossed 3,000 in October and thought it vast. By the end of the scalpel training he had crossed 6, and then, on a night when Roll pushed him through 9 straight exchanges without a single wasted motion, the system gave him a window it had never given him before, one that hung a beat longer than the others and burned a degree brighter. Tier Ascension. You have OUTGROWN, the scale the instrument was built to read. There is no longer a number in this school above you except 1, and he is not in this school. The cage has no word for what you are becoming. Continue. Hermione made him repeat the window twice so she could copy it down, and then she sat very still for a moment, the chalk forgotten in her hand. There's no one above you but Roll, she said slowly, and you passed Roll a week ago. You just let him keep winning because he's still teaching you. Harry, you're the strongest wizard at Hogwarts, not the strongest student. The strongest wizard, including the staff, including the headmaster on raw output, though not on the 1,000 other things he knows that you don't. She set the chalk down. 6 weeks ago you couldn't shield a stinging hex, and I wrote it on a slate because I didn't believe it either, and I'm looking at the slate right now and I still don't, except that the slate doesn't lie and neither does the window. So, Harry agreed, it should have felt like triumph. He waited for it to feel like triumph, the way he had waited on the first night for the climbing to feel like winning, and instead it felt like the 4 of them in a borrowed classroom past midnight, Hermione's slates and Ron half asleep in a chair in Cash and Roll, of all the people in the world, leaning in a doorway with the particular stillness of a wizard who has decided to spend his finest year teaching the one student who would surpass him. That was the part the windows never counted, and the part Harry had come to need more than any of them. The number was his alone, The room was theirs. He trained in the open now. That was the other change. Secret had burned on the dais, and so there was no longer any reason to hide the room or the work, and word got around, the way word always got around, that the one who broke the gauge spent his nights learning to fight from cash and roll, and students began to come and watch from the tiers of the trial hall, the same students who had laughed, and they did not laugh now. They watched the way you watch whether you have been told is coming for you, and Harry let them, because there was a use in it he had not expected. Let them see a wizard who could level a wall choose instead to learn restraint. Let them learn, watching, that power and the refusal to waste it were not opposites. If he was going to be the thing the school looked at, he would at least be a thing worth the looking. It was the steadiest Harry had felt all year, and he distrusted it because the cost was climbing too. The strain showed first in small things. He could not turn the climbing off anymore. A term ago, leveling had been a thing he did in the room and set aside. Now it ran underneath everything, every duel with Roll, every problem Hermione set, every spell cast in anger or in practice, the door behind his sternum permanently ajar, and the trouble with a door that will not fully close is that you start to forget it was ever shut. He caught himself in the third week, reaching for more in moments that did not call for it, breaking a limit to win a sparring match that did not need to be won that hard, feeling the surge come up clean and total and wanting it, the way you want a thing that has only ever felt like becoming more yourself. The system, which never flattered him, told him the truth about that too. You are beginning to enjoy it for its own sake. This is the oldest danger of an uncapped thing, and the one I cannot protect you from because it is not an enemy. It is you. Every wizard who ever broke the wrong way began here, not in cruelty, but in the simple pleasure of no longer being told to stop. The wizard with the mark felt this pleasure once. He never stopped feeling it. That is what he is. It was Ron who caught it in the end, not the system, because the system could name the danger, but only a person could stand in the way of it. Harry had broken a limit to win a spar he should have lost on points, had thrown Roll clean across the trial hall in a wash of white that scorched the gold circles, and he had laughed, and the laugh had a note in it that did not belong to him, and Ron had crossed the floor and stood in front of him, an ordinary wizard with a ceiling he could see from where he stood, and said, "Oi, there you are, come back. You went somewhere just then, and I didn't like the look of where it was." And Harry had come back and seen Roll picking himself up off the floor 20 feet away, and understood with a cold that had nothing to do with the hall how easy it would be, how very easy, to keep climbing past the place where the people who anchored him could still reach. "That's the deal then," Harry said that night to the three of them. "If I start to go, you pull me back, even if I'm winning, especially if I'm winning. Hermione, you watch the numbers. Ron, you watch me. Roll, you watch the door." He looked at them, the only people in the world who knew what he was and had decided to stand near it anyway. "I don't have a ceiling, so you three are going to have to be one, not a wall, a hand on the shoulder. The difference matters." "That," said Hermione, "is the first wise thing you've said all year, and I want it on the record that it took you nearly being eaten by your own power to say it." "Noted," said Harry. "Put it on a slate." Dumbledore came to the war room 2 nights later, and this time he did not sit among the slates pretending not to read them. This time he brought a sword. He laid it on the desk between the chalk and the manuals, an old blade, silver, set with rubies the size of eggs, and Harry knew it from a story Ron had told him once, the goblin-made sword that lived in the headmaster's office and turned up, the legend said, in the hand of a true Gryffindor who needed it. "You have learned, I think, that the wizard you are going to face is divided," Dumbledore said, without preamble, which from Dumbledore was its own kind of alarm. 7 pieces, the system told you. A scaffold of stolen rooms lashed around a wall he could not move. I have spent 50 years confirming what you learned in an evening, and I will tell you what 50 years bought me, because we are past the age, you and I, where I get to keep things back for your own good. He touched the sword. His pieces are objects. He poured a fragment of his torn soul into each and hid them, and as long as a single one survives, he cannot truly die. You can put his body down as you nearly put Dolohov down, and he will rise again from the next anchor and the next, deathless until every piece is destroyed. The Order has spent the war hunting them, and in all that time we have managed to destroy not one of them, because they are hidden beyond any finding I command. 7 remain. And we believe one of them, and here, for the first time Harry had ever seen, Albus Dumbledore looked almost rueful. One of them has been, this entire time, hidden inside the very room in which you have been training. None, Hermione repeated, leaning over the desk, because Hermione could not receive a fact without interrogating it. You have hunted them for years and destroyed none. So before we do this, I need to know why. How is a thing like that even unmade, and what has it cost the people who have tried? Because if we are about to start, I would like to know the price before we pay it. They can be destroyed, Dumbledore said. The means are few and terrible, and I have spent years gathering them that soared among them. But a vessel does not surrender quietly. Each carries a fragment of the most dangerous wizard who ever lived, and a cornered fragment fights. He drew back the sleeve of his right hand briefly, and Harry saw the blackened, withered ruin of it, a hand that looked a year dead while the rest of him went on living, and understood that the headmaster's exhaustion this term had a source he had never once mentioned. I found one, a ring. I reached for it before I understood what it would do, and it did this, and it will, in time, finish what it started, which is a conversation for another night. I did not dare the rest, because to unmake an anchor you must first find it, and they are hidden beyond any art of finding I possess. 7 remain, and until tonight I could not have told you where a single one of them lay, except for the one above our heads, which the system has located for us by pure accident, because we put the one wizard alive who can read the threads in a room with a thread to read. Ron, who had been quiet through all of it, spoke up from his chair. So we're not just picking a fight, we're taking a piece off him, making him smaller, permanently. He looked at the sword on the desk. I don't know the soul magic. I'm never going to know the soul magic, but I know subtraction. 7 minus 1 is 6, and 6 minus 1 is 5, and you keep doing that, and eventually you've got a bloke with a body and no spare lives, and then Harry only has to win once. He shrugged, a little embarrassed at the silence that followed. What? Somebody had to say the simple version. The simple version, said Dumbledore with something that was almost a smile, is very often the true one. Yes, Mr. Weasley, we make him smaller. And then the system tells us your friend makes himself larger, and somewhere in the gap between those two motions, the war is decided. The cold that went through Harry then was not the cold of the dark field. It was the simpler cold of a person who has been sleeping beside a snake and only now been told. The come-and-go room has more than one face, Dumbledore said. You have asked it for a place to grow, and it has given you a bare hall and a row of dummies. But it has another face, a vast one, a place where the castle has hidden its forgotten and forbidden things for 1,000 years, and somewhere in that hoard, Tom Riddle hid a piece of himself decades ago, believing no one would ever think to look in a room that becomes whatever it is asked to be. The system gave you the tether in the gallery, Harry. The thread you pulled to empty Dolohov. I am asking whether you can find that thread again here in the castle and follow it to the anchor at its end. Harry did not answer with words. He closed his eyes and reached with the thing behind his sternum the way he had reached for Dolohov's tether, and let the analysis page widen until it was not reading a person in front of him but the whole castle around him, and it took a moment, and then he found it, a thread. Cold and bright and wrong, the same wrongness he had read on the gaunt wizard, running up through the stone from somewhere above, somewhere he knew, a thread that ended in a small, fierce knot of stolen room hidden among 1,000 years of forgotten things. Anchor detected, first of 7. Signature confirmed, a piece of the divided one. IT has been here all along. You have trained a wall-s width from a fragment of your enemy's soul for an entire term. It did not notice you. It will notice you now. It's there, Harry said. Above us in the hoard, I can feel it. He opened his eyes. I can take it. The way I took Dolohov's, I don't have to cut it with a sword. I can pull it apart from the inside, sever the thread, and let the stolen room collapse. He looked at Dumbledore. But the second I do, he feels it. He felt Dolohov from 100 miles away. He'll feel a whole anchor die. There's no quiet way to do this. The moment we unmake the third piece, he knows exactly where I am, and that I can do to his scaffold what no one in 50 years has managed, and he comes. Yes, said Dumbledore simply. He comes, which is why I have brought the sword, and why I have spent the day sending word to everyone I trust, and why I am going to ask you the hardest question I have asked anyone in a very long life. The old man met his eyes, and there was no twinkle now, no lamp, only the bare exhausted honesty of someone who has run out of time for anything else. We can leave the anchor where it is. We can keep hunting the others quietly, for months, for years, and keep you hidden and growing, and perhaps in time we unmake all 7 without ever forcing the final confrontation, and perhaps you are ready when it comes. Or we destroy this piece tonight, and we bring the war to a head on ground of our choosing, in a castle full of children, against a divided god who will arrive in a rage, while you are stronger than any wizard alive but younger than you should be and not yet finished. Both roads are terrible. I have walked the cautious road my whole life, Harry, and the cautious road is how good men arrive too late. But it is not my life that pays for the bold one, so I am not going to choose. You are. You are the only one of us with no ceiling, and that means you are the only one of us whose choice is not already made for him by his limits. Tell me which road we walk. Harry looked at the sword and the slates and the 3 friends who had appointed themselves his ceiling and the castle around him full of children who had laughed at a houseplant and would, tonight or some night soon, need a thing with no limit to stand between them and the dark. We ended on our ground, Harry said, not theirs. He spent 50 years choosing where his wars happen. Let's take that from him too. He picked up the sword, and it was lighter than it looked and warm in his hand. Tonight, we destroy the anchor tonight, and we let him come, and when he gets here I'll be standing in the one place in Britain where I've spent every night for a term learning exactly how to be more than he is. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment, and then he did a thing Harry would remember for the rest of his life, however long or short that turned out to be. The greatest wizard of the age inclined his head, not the courteous fraction he had given a Null at a reading, but a full bow, the bow of a man acknowledging that the decision had passed, at last, out of his hands and into better ones. Then let us go and wake your enemy, said Albus Dumbledore, and may the people who come after us forgive us if we have judged it wrong. The hoard was a cathedral of forgotten things. Harry had asked the room for a training hall every night for a term, and never once thought to ask it for what it truly held. And now, walking into the other face of it with the sword in his hand and Dumbledore and Roll at his back and Hermione's voice in his ear reciting everything she knew about cursed objects, he understood the scale of his own blindness. The hoard went up and back farther than the eye could follow, mountains of it, the abandoned and the hidden and the forbidden of 1,000 years, towers of broken furniture and stacked books and the wreckage of 10,000 schemes, and somewhere in it, a single thread of cold, bright wrongness, pulling at the place behind his sternum like a hook behind the ribs. "Talk to me," Hermione said in his ear. She had refused to be left in the war room, and so she walked a half-step behind him with the Standards manual open and her wand lit, and she narrated the dangers as they came, the way she narrated everything, because a danger named was a danger half-managed. Cursed objects in a hoard like this can be contagious. Don't touch anything that wants to be touched. If something feels valuable, it's lying. The diadem will feel like the most important thing in the room, and that feeling is the curse working, not your judgment. "It feels," Harry said, eyes half closed, following the cold, bright thread through the canyons of forgotten things, like a hook behind the ribs, like the room is leaning toward one corner. "That's it, that's the soul piece calling." Riddle hit it well. He'd have walked these aisles himself once, a brilliant, frightened boy who'd found the one room in Britain that hides things, and thought he was the cleverest person ever to set foot in it. She paused. He probably was, that's the awful part. He was the cleverest person in every room he ever entered, and it made him certain, and certainty is what got him here, hidden in a pile of junk, waiting 50 years for a clever one to walk in. Her wand light caught the towers of the hoard, climbing away into a dark that had no ceiling of its own. "Don't be certain, Harry. Whatever happens at the end of this thread, promise me you won't be certain. Certainty is the thing he and you have most in common, and it's the thing I'm most afraid of in both of you." Roll, pacing the aisle behind them with his wand drawn, said nothing, but his eyes never stopped moving, and that was its own kind of promise, the surgeon watching the doors while the staircase climbed. He followed it, the others guarded his flanks while he walked the canyons of junk with his eyes half closed, reading, and the thread grew brighter and colder until he came to it. A bust of some forgotten wizard, and on its stone brow a tarnished diadem, blue stones gone dim, and around it the air itself had the greasy wrongness of a thing that should not be, a small fierce knot of stolen room with a fragment of a torn soul screaming silently at its center. "There," said the system, "a piece of HIM. It knows you now, it is calling home. It's warning him," Hermione breathed, "whatever you're going to do it fast." Harry could have used the sword. Dumbledore had brought the sword for exactly this, and the legends said the blade could destroy these things, and it would have been the safe way, the proven way. But Harry had not spent a term learning the scalpel to reach for a hammer at the end of it, and he understood, looking at the screaming knot of stolen room, that the sword would only break the vessel, while he could do something the sword could not. He could unmake the theft itself. He set down the sword. He reached out, not with his hand, with the thing behind his sternum, and he took the thread the way he had taken Dolohov's, and this time he did not sever it from the outside. He followed it inward into the stolen room, into the architecture of the theft, the crude, brutal genius of a man who had torn off a piece of his own soul and bolted a stolen space around it to make himself larger, and Harry saw, in that instant, the whole horror and the whole smallness of it at once. That Voldemort's immortality was not strength but accounting, a structure, a scaffold, 7 rented rooms lashed around a wall he had been too frightened to simply live inside, and that the thing the whole wizarding world had feared for half a century was, at its center, a man who could not bear to be finite and had chosen to be monstrous instead. Limit broken. Harry pulled, and the stolen room did not collapse so much as it was returned, unmade, the theft reversed, the fragment of torn soul that had hidden inside it for 50 years, exposed all at once to the simple fact of a wizard with no ceiling who did not need to steal a single inch of room from anyone, and it could not bear the comparison, and it came apart with a sound like a scream heard underwater. And a wash of black smoke poured out of the diadem and rose screaming toward the cathedral ceiling of the hoard and was gone. The blue stones of the diadem cracked, the greasy wrongness lifted from the air. And far away, across miles of dark country, something vast and cold and divided lost a seventh of itself in an instant and turned its full and undivided attention, for the first time in 50 years, on a single point on the map, a castle in the Highlands, a room within it, a boy with a sword at his feet and no ceiling over his head. The first anchor is unmade. He is diminished by a seventh, and he is, for the first time, afraid, because no one has ever taken a piece from HIM, and he did not know until this moment that it could be done. He is coming. He is not sending. He is coming himself with everything that remains of his scaffold, and he will be here before dawn. Final threshold unlocked. They had perhaps 2 hours before he came in person. His vanguard took 90 minutes of it. The first the castle knew of them was the green light blooming over the gates, a dozen dark marks rising into the pre-dawn dark like foul stars, and then the Death Eaters were pouring up the path, 30 of them, 40, the whole surviving strength of a 50-year war thrown at a single castle, because the divided thing that commanded them had finally found a reason to spend everything at once. The defenders met them at the steps. McGonagall woke the suits of armor and sent them down the path in a clanking iron tide. Flitwick stood at the doors and turned the air itself into a wall. The older students who had refused to be sent away fought in pairs the way the trials had taught them, and Hermione moved among them directing fire with the cold precision she had once spent on a slate, and Ron held the left flank of the steps with a stubbornness that was its own kind of magic, shielding 3 first-years who had not made the tower while he bellowed corrections at students twice his standing. At the head of the vanguard, laughing, came Bellatrix Lestrange. Harry read her as she climbed. Ceiling 8,800, current output 8,800. She fought at the very top of herself the way the truly dangerous did, and she fought with the joy of a person who had never once been asked to be anything but cruel, and she cut a path up the steps that nothing seemed able to close until she reached the place where Harry stood, and her ruined, beautiful face split into a grin. "The little lamp," she crooned. "He sent us ahead to soften you. He wants you tired when he arrives." Her wand came up faster than Draco, faster than Dolohov, a duelist at the top of a very high wall. Let's see how soft a 4 gets. She was the best he had faced. Better than Dolohov, who had been borrowing his strength. Bellatrix needed nothing borrowed. She was simply, naturally, monstrously good, and for 10 seconds she pressed him back across the bloody steps, and the system counted the danger in a flood. But Harry had spent 3 weeks learning the scalpel from the only wizard in the school who could teach it, and Bellatrix fought like a flood, all joy and force and not a scrap of economy, and a flood, Roll had taught him, loses to a surgeon the moment the surgeon stops flinching. He stopped giving ground. He stopped meeting her force with force. He began to spend only what each exchange required, a shield exactly where her curse went, a step exactly when it mattered, nothing wasted, nothing announced, and Bellatrix, who had never met an opponent who simply would not waste anything, began, for the first time in her terrible life, to work for it. The grin flickered. She poured more into it, 8,800 points of cruelty, every inch of everything she would ever be, and it was not enough, because everything she would ever be was a fixed number and the thing across from her was not. Current output 7,400, 7,900, 8,400. She is the finest duelist you have ever faced, and SHE is losing, and she does not yet understand WHY. SHE is finished. You are not. That is the whole of it. It will be the whole of the next fight too. Remember this when the number is 41,000. He did not kill her. Cassian Roll reached his flank as Harry's rising output crossed her ceiling, and between the surgeon and the staircase with no top, they took Bellatrix Lestrange apart, not with a flood but with 2 scalpels working in concert, and Harry caught her wand out of the air the way he had caught Draco's, and Roll put her down with a single economical stunner, and the head of the vanguard folded onto the steps of the school with the grin gone from her face at last. The breaking of Bellatrix broke the vanguard. The Death Eaters who saw their fiercest fall hesitated, and a hesitating attacker is a beaten one, and the defenders of Hogwarts pressed down the steps, and the iron tide closed, and the green stars guttered out one by one. The cost was real, and Harry would not let himself look away from it. There were defenders on the steps who would not rise, names McGonagall would carry, and Harry felt each of them as a number that had simply stopped, and the system, which counted everything, counted those too, in a register it did not show him, and he was glad not to see. And then, as the last of the vanguard fell or fled into the dark, the temperature of the world dropped, not the ordinary cold of a battle ending, but the deeper cold Harry had felt only twice before, the cold of a door opening very far away in a very large house. The laughing and the screaming and the clash of iron all stopped at once, as though the night itself had drawn breath, and every wizard on the steps, defender and attacker alike, turned toward the broken gates because the vanguard had only ever been the knock. The thing that had sent them had arrived. He came up the path himself, alone, walking between the bodies of the vanguard he had spent like coins, and the sky came down with him. Harry felt the full weight of it before he saw the shape that carried it, standing on the broken front steps with the battle still smoking behind him, the surviving defenders going silent in ranks, Hermione and Ron and Cassian Roll at his shoulders, ash and frost on the stone. He felt the dark field, the thing the system had warned him of since the second week, the vast old sleeping country beneath the world, and he understood that the approaching wizard was not the field, had never been the field, was only a man, but a man who had spent 50 years knocking on the same door Harry had blown off its hinges, and that the door behind Voldemort and the door behind Harry led in the end to the same dark place, and only one of them would reach it. The wards of Hogwarts, the oldest and strongest in Britain, met the thing coming up the path and held for 9 seconds. Harry counted them. On the 9th they did not break so much as bow, peeled back like the lid of a tin, and through the gap came a cold that was not weather and a silence that was not quiet, and at the center of it, walking up the path between the dead wards with the unhurried certainty of a thing that has never once been refused, came the largest finished wizard in the world. He was less than Harry had imagined and more. Less because he was only a man-shaped, tall and pale and serpentine, robed in black, a wand of white bone in a long white hand. More because the analysis page, when Harry turned it on him, did not give a number, it gave a structure. A vast lashed scaffold of stolen rooms, 6 remaining where there had been 7, each one a wall bolted to a wall, an architecture of theft so large that the page could barely contain it. And at the center of all of it, small and cold and screaming, the original wall, the ceiling Tom Riddle had been born with and could not move, the cage he had spent his whole monstrous life decorating because he could not bring himself to live inside it. Ceiling 41,000, artificial, 6 anchors remaining. Fractured BOUNDED. Harry had read a great many wizards by now, and reading them had always been a kind of seeing, a number and a shape and the faint pre-flicker of intent. Reading Voldemort was not seeing, it was vertigo. The page tried to render him and kept failing and trying again because the divided one was not built like a wizard. He was built like an argument against being one, a cathedral of theft raised in defiance of a law older than cathedrals. Where another wizard's power sat inside him the way water sits in a cup, Voldemort's hung around him in lashed and groaning tears. 6 stolen rooms bolted wall to wall to wall, each one a murder, each one a year, each one a place he had carved out of the world and dragged back to nail onto the outside of a self too small to hold it. And at the dead center of all of it, smaller than everything it carried, was the thing the whole monstrous structure existed to hide, a wall, an ordinary wall. The ceiling Tom Riddle had been born with, the same kind of ceiling every wizard in the graveyard of names on the cracked index board had been born with, the cage that the orphan who would become Voldemort had looked at once long ago, and found so unbearable that he had chosen to become a haunted scaffold rather than live one more day inside it. It was the most powerful thing Harry had ever stood before. It was also, he understood with a clarity that bordered on pity, the most frightened. Everything Voldemort had built, the murders and the anchors and the vast lashed architecture of his deathlessness, all of it was the work of a wizard who had struck a wall and could not bear it, and had spent 50 years proving, to a world that had never asked, that the wall did not apply to him. He had not escaped the cage, he had decorated it. He had made himself enormous and named the enormity freedom, and never once noticed that a thing which grows only by stealing has confessed, in the very act of it, that it cannot grow at all. You see it now, said the system in the Baroque register, the cold grand voice it kept for the largest truths. This is what the cage does to the ONES who refuse it without being born free of it. They do not rise, THEY hoard. He is the greatest hoarder who has ever lived, and a hoard, vast as it GROWS, is still a finished thing, because a hoard is only ever as large as what has already been stolen. You have never stolen an inch, that is why he cannot measure you, that is why he is here, and that is WHY if you are given enough of the next hour, you win, 41,000. It was a number out of nightmare, more than 4 times the greatest natural ceiling Harry had ever read, the accumulated theft of 50 years of murder, and for one moment looking at it, Harry felt the cold certainty that he had judged it wrong, that he was a boy of 9,000 against a thing of 41,000, that the bold road had been the wrong road, and the castle full of children behind him was going to pay for his pride. And then the system, which had never once lied to him, gave him the only number that had ever mattered. His ceiling, 41,000, fixed, fractured, BOUNDED, it will not rise, it cannot, there are no more pieces of HIM to ADD, and the scaffold does not grow, it only holds, your ceiling none, he is a wall 41,000 feet high, you are a staircase with no top. The only question that has ever mattered is whether you can climb 41,000 steps before he puts you down. Everything you have done this year was practice for the next hour. Voldemort stopped at the foot of the steps and looked up at the assembled defenders of Hogwarts, and dismissed every one of them with his eyes until those eyes found Harry, and stopped and considered, with the cold curiosity of a thing examining the only object in the world it could not account for. "Oh," said Lord Voldemort in a voice like the absence of a voice, "you are the lamp in the window, the child with no ceiling, the little thief who took back what was mine," his head tilted, serpentine. "I have spent 50 years making myself the largest thing that has ever lived. I broke the world's law. I tore it down and built it back around me room by room, and there is nothing left above me, nothing. Do you understand? I am the ceiling now. I am the top of the only ladder there is." The white wand rose. "And then a child, a measured nothing, a 4, lit himself up in my sky and took a piece of me as though I were a common wizard with a common wall. I confess I am curious, before I correct the error. What does it feel like to be the one thing I cannot count?" Harry looked up at the largest finished thing in the world, the wizard who had broken himself into 7 pieces rather than live inside a wall, the warning at the end of every history Dumbledore had tried to teach him, and felt the door behind his sternum, which he had spent a term learning to open and a harder week learning when to close, and he knew, with a clarity that was almost peace, the answer to the only question that had ever mattered. "It feels," Harry said, "like the only thing you never learned. Come up the ladder, Tom. Let's find out which of us it ends." Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. Ascend without limit. The first spell Lord Voldemort threw at Harry Potter was the killing curse, and Harry did the one thing in all the world that no wizard had ever done to it, which was learn it on the way past. The green light came up the broken steps faster than thought, faster than the eye, the curse with no counter, the death even Dumbledore could only dodge. Harry did not dodge, he had stopped dodging things weeks ago. He bent the air the way he had bent it for Dolohov, turned the curse 3 degrees off true so that it screamed past his ear and took the top off a gargoyle, and in the half-second the curse crossed in front of him, the analysis page did the thing it had been built to do, the thing the cage had never imagined a use for, and read the spell. Analysis, killing curse, structure acquired. A spell seen clearly is a spell that can be learned. He has thrown it 10,000 times, you have seen it once. That is enough. Skill unlocked, the killing curse. You will not need it, I will tell you when. Voldemort's serpentine face did not change, because Voldemort had spent 50 years past the reach of surprise, but something in the white wand hesitated, a fractional pause, the first uncertainty Harry had read in him. He had thrown the unanswerable thing, and it had been answered, not blocked, not survived, answered, turned aside by a child who appeared to have looked at the deadliest curse in the world the way a student looks at a sum. Interesting, said Voldemort, and threw 6 more. The duel that followed would be argued over for 100 years by people who had not seen it, and described by the handful who had in the broken half-sentences of those who have watched a thing too large for language. McGonagall would say only that the sky had changed color. Cassian Roll, who had spent his life studying how wizards fight, would say that it was not dueling, that dueling was a word for what people did, and that what happened on the steps of Hogwarts that morning needed a word that had not been invented yet. Hermione, who understood it better than anyone because she had watched it assemble for a whole year, would say the truest thing, which was that it was not a fight between a strong wizard and a stronger one. It was a fight between a finished thing and an unfinished one, and everyone had always known how that ends. They had simply never been forced to watch it happen in an hour. Harry was outgunned at the sound of the first curse, and he knew it. 41,000 against 9,000 and some, better than 4 times over, a wall so high it had its own weather. For the first minute he did nothing but survive, and surviving Voldemort was harder than anything Bellatrix or Dolohov or Roll had ever asked of him, because Voldemort wasted nothing and predicted everything, and had the economy Roll had spent a term teaching plus 50 years Roll did not have, and the only thing that kept Harry alive in that first minute was that he had no ceiling and Voldemort could not, would not, did not believe it. That was the crack, that was the whole war in a flaw. Voldemort had broken the world's law to escape his ceiling, and in doing so had made the ceiling the deepest fact of his mind, the thing under all his other thoughts, so that even now, facing the one being ever born without one, he fought to find a ceiling that was not there, certain past all reason that if he simply threw enough, the child across from him would at last strike his limit and break against it, the way every other thing Voldemort had ever fought had eventually broken. He fought to find Harry's ceiling, and Harry did not have one, and every curse Voldemort threw to find it was a question Harry had never been asked, and the system counted in a flood that had no name. XP plus 8000, XP plus 14000. This is the RICHEST teacher that has ever existed. Every second you survive HIM, you become more nearly HIM and then more than HIM. Climb. Current output 11,000. 16,000, 22,000. He learned as he survived. That was the thing no one watching could have understood, the thing that made the impossible arithmetic of the morning quietly tilt. Every curse Voldemort threw, Harry read on the way past, and reading was learning. So the duel became the only kind of fight in the history of the world in which the weaker wizard grew stronger by being attacked. Voldemort threw a curse that turned stone to a swarm of biting things, and Harry bent it aside and had it. He threw a curse that aged the air in a man's lungs to poison, and Harry held his breath through it and had it. He threw the old cruelties, the ones with names struck from the books, the ones he had invented himself across 50 years of practice on people who could not fight back, and Harry took each of them the way a good student takes a hard lesson, once completely, and never needed it twice. Skill unlocked, skill unlocked, skill unlocked. He has spent 50 years assembling an arsenal no one could survive long enough to copy. You are copying it. Every weapon he shows you becomes yours the instant he shows it, and he cannot stop showing you because it is the only way he knows to fight. The largest finished thing in the world is teaching the only unfinished one everything it knows. It cannot help itself. That is what finished means. The sky above the castle had gone the color of a bruise, and the curses that mist wrote themselves across it in long tears of light, and far off on the ramparts and in the surviving towers, the defenders of Hogwarts stopped fighting the broken remnants of the vanguard and simply stood, watching, because there was nothing they could add and nothing left to do but witness the thing that had no word for it yet. A boy and a god taking the morning apart on the steps of a school, and the younger of them, against 400 years of certainty, against all the arithmetic anyone had ever trusted, climbing. Harry climbed inside the duel the way he had climbed inside the duel with Draco, except that Draco had been a fixed wall of 5,000 and Voldemort was a fixed wall of 41. And so the climb took longer and cost more and burned hotter, and the steps of Hogwarts came apart under the two of them, stone vaporizing where curses missed, the great oak doors gone, the gargoyles gone, a crater opening where the front courtyard had been, and through all of it Harry rose, and Voldemort, who could not rise, began for the first time in 50 years to spend his hoard faster than a hoard likes to be spent. But surviving was not winning. Harry could climb toward 41,000 all morning, and Voldemort would simply kill him at 30 or 35 or 1 foot short of the top, because a wall does not have to be infinite to be taller than you, it only has to be taller than you right now. And the system had told him on the night the diadem died exactly how a finite thing taller than you is beaten. You do not climb over it, you take it apart. Harry found the first tether in the second minute, while a curse he did not know took a chunk out of his shoulder that he did not have time to feel. Voldemort's 6 anchors hung off him in lashed and groaning tears, and each one was bolted to him by a thread of stolen room, a tether exactly like the one that had run to Dolohov, except that these ran the other way, from Voldemort out into the dark country of Britain to the 5 places he had hidden himself, and the one he did not yet know was already dead. Harry reached for the nearest thread the way he had reached in the gallery, and he pulled. Limit broken. The first anchor died 100 miles away in a vault under a bank, and Harry felt it go the way you feel a tooth come out, a wrongness suddenly absent, and Voldemort's vast lashed scaffold lurched and dropped, 41,000 to 34 in a single instant, and the wall that had had its own weather staggered, and for the first time the largest finished thing in the world made a sound that was not a word. It cost Harry. Pulling the tether took everything, took the whole of his attention for the half-second it required, and Voldemort, even staggered, even diminished, was fast enough to punish it. And the curse that came through Harry's dropped guard put him across the ruined courtyard and through what had been a wall, and the pain was enormous, and Harry got up, because getting up was the only spell he had ever truly needed. You take pieces of me, Voldemort said, and there was something new in the absence of his voice now, something Harry had read on the page in the second before the diadem died and had not expected ever to read on the face of the most powerful wizard alive. You take pieces of me. No one takes pieces of me. I am the thing that takes. I know, Harry said, getting up, blood in his mouth, output climbing. That's the problem with being a hoard, Tom. Everything you are is somewhere a thief can reach. I'm not taking pieces of you, I'm giving them back to the people you stole the room from. There's a difference, you've just never been on this side of it. The second anchor was in a shack by the sea, and Harry pulled it in the 3rd minute and took a curse across the ribs for it that cracked 4 of them, and Voldemort dropped to 27,000. The 3rd was in a cave, and Harry pulled it in the 4th minute, and Voldemort opened a wound down his arm to the bone for the privilege, and dropped to 20. There was a rhythm to it, and the rhythm was the most dangerous place Harry had ever lived. Survive, climb, find a tether, pull. The pulling cost him everything for the half-second it took, and Voldemort, who missed nothing, learned the rhythm faster than Harry liked and began to bait it, leaving a tether easy to reach so that Harry would lunge and drop his guard into a curse already on its way. The first time, it nearly finished him. The second time, Harry read the bait for what it was and did not take it, pulling a different tether instead, the harder one, and the trap closed on empty air, and the most powerful wizard in the world made the small, grudging adjustment of a duelist who has just discovered that his opponent is also thinking, and did not enjoy the discovery. Harry, you're left, came Hermione's voice raw from across the crater, because she had refused to be sent anywhere safe and had appointed herself his eyes the way she had appointed herself everything, calling the angles he could not watch while he pulled. He's herding you toward the lake, don't let him put the water at your back. McGonagall, gray-faced, threw a slab of transfigured stone between Harry and a curse meant for his spine, and bought him a breath she could not spare. Roll worked the edges, cold and economical, keeping the last of the Death Eaters off the people keeping Harry alive. He was not fighting alone. He had not been alone since the 2nd week, and the whole difference between him and the thing across from him was written in that one fact. Voldemort had come to the end of the world with no one at his back but the stolen pieces of himself, and Harry had come with 3 people who had chosen to stand in a crater beside a thing they could not match, for no reason at all except that it was him. And here the duel changed, because at 20,000 Voldemort stopped trying to find Harry's ceiling and started, at last, to be afraid of not having found it. Harry read the change before Voldemort knew he had made it. The economy got tighter, the curses got crueler and more careful. The serpentine calm developed for the first time, a grain of haste, and haste in a duelist is the beginning of the end. Roll had taught him that on the first night, because the wizard who hurries is the wizard who has started, somewhere underneath, to count the exchanges he has left. Voldemort had spent 50 years certain that his scaffold made him unkillable, and now a child was unmaking it a piece at a time, and the arithmetic that had been the bedrock of his whole monstrous life, the certainty of his own deathlessness, was coming apart in real time, anchor by anchor, and the most powerful wizard in the world was learning, at the very end of a life spent escaping it, what it felt like to have a number that only went down. Dumbledore fought beside him. That was the thing Harry would hold on to afterward, in the quiet, when he tried to make sense of the morning. The old man had said on the floor of the wrecked Great Hall that he would rather stand beside the thing with no ceiling than behind one more wall, and he had meant it. And now he stood in the crater of the courtyard with his black and dying hand and his 100 years, and through transfiguration and fire and old deep magics with no names against a god, not to beat the god because he could not beat the god, but to buy Harry the half-seconds the tetherpoles cost. To be the wall Harry could drop his guard behind, to spend the last of a long life purchasing time for a boy who had refused to be made safe. The fourth, Dumbledore gasped between castings, his face gray, the ring curse and the duel together pulling him down by the minute. Harry, wherever it is, take it. I will hold him. I have held him before. I can hold him 1 minute more. The old man was magnificent in those last minutes, and Harry would make certain afterward that the ones who wrote the histories knew it, because the histories love a chosen boy and forget the wall he stood behind. Dumbledore fought a god to standstill with one hand blackened and dying and 100 years dragging at his bones. And he did it not with the bright theatrical fire of the trial hall, but with deep old magics that belonged on no ladder at all. Magic from before the accord, before the cage, the kind a wizard learns only by living long enough to watch every measured thing fail, and then going looking for the unmeasured. He turned the broken stone of the crater into a wall, and the wall into a vast gray hand, and the hand held Voldemort for 3 whole seconds while Harry found the fourth tether, and 3 seconds against a god is a lifetime, and the old keeper spent every one of them the way he had spent his whole life, buying time for someone else with coin he could not afford to lose. Harry took the fourth. It was in a manor house, a cup, and he pulled it in the 5th minute, and Voldemort dropped to 14,000 and turned in his haste in his new and terrible uncertainty, and threw at Albus Dumbledore the curse he had been saving, the green light, the unanswerable thing, while the old man's guard was down from holding the line. Harry was 20 feet away. He had learned the curse on the first exchange, and the system had told him he would not need it and would tell him when, and this was not that, this was the opposite of that. This was a curse he could not throw and could not stop and could only, in the half-second it crossed the ruined courtyard toward the only adult who had ever chosen to stand beside him instead of using him, try to reach. He did not reach it in time. That was the cost of the morning, the one the system counted in the register it never showed him. Albus Dumbledore, who had kept the threshold accord for 50 years, who had been wrong so many times and tried so hard to be right, who had offered a boy a cage and then at the end offered him a hand instead, met the green light standing up, facing it, and fell in the crater of the school he had spent his life protecting, and the last thing on his face was not fear. Harry read it in the half-second with the page that read everything. It was relief. The old keeper had spent 100 years being the one the others stood behind, and he had died at the very last standing beside, and it was the thing he had wanted, and Harry would carry that, the relief, on Dumbledore's face for the rest of however long he lived. Something happened in Harry then that the system had been warning him about since the 2nd week. The door behind his sternum, the one he had spent a term learning to open and a harder week learning when to close, came off its hinges entirely, and this time there was nothing on the other side of it but up. Dumbledore was dead. The thing that had killed him was finite now, 14,000, falling, beatable, and Harry was climbing, and the grief and the terrible clean wanting all came together into a single pull, and Harry reached not for a tether but for the thing the whole year had been walking him toward, the thing Voldemort had wanted and never found, the thing the dark field had been waiting for since the first small light in the corridor. He reached for no limit, all of it, everything. The whole staircase with no top, climbed in a single stride, ascension without end, godhood, the thing that would let him not just beat Voldemort but unmake him, unmake the Death Eaters, unmake death itself, raise the old man out of the crater, rewrite the morning, become the weather, and bend it to be kind. It was right there. It had always been right there. The only being ever born able to reach it, reaching with every reason in the world. And the dark field, the vast old country beneath the world, the thing the accord had been built to keep asleep, the thing that woke when limits broke and dreamed of doors, rolled the rest of the way over, and opened very slightly an eye, because the door it had waited an age for was finally being opened from the inside. Harry stood at the threshold of everything. He could feel in the place behind his sternum the whole of the staircase at once, not as steps now but as a single unbroken sweep, and at the top of it, where there had never been a top, there was the thing the field had spent an age dreaming of. A door, and through the door a power that did not climb but simply was, total and final, the end of all limits, including the ones that made a person a person. The terrible part, the part he would never be able to make anyone understand who had not stood where he stood, was that it did not feel like temptation. It felt like sense. It felt like the obvious and loving and reasonable thing. Dumbledore lay dead in the crater. Through the door, Dumbledore was not dead. Defenders had been murdered on the steps. Through the door, they had not been. Every wrong of the morning, of the year, of the whole long indifferent cruelty of the world, could be reached back into and gently set right, and all of it cost a single step, the last step, the one step he was the only being ever born able to take. "This is IT," said the system, and for the only time in the entire year, the clipped neutral voice that had never once told him to stop sounded almost like it wanted to. "This is the place every wizard who ever broke the wrong way arrived. Not in cruelty, in grief, and in power, and in the purest and most reasonable wanting there has ever been. One more step and you can fix it, all of it. And the field will have its door and you will be what he is and worse because you will have no wall to stop it. I was built never to tell you to stop. I am not telling you to stop. I am only telling you what is through the door." And a hand closed on Harry's shoulder. It was Ron. Of course it was Ron. Bleeding from the battle, his wand spent, no power left in him to speak of, a respectable 4,000 in a ceiling he could see from where he stood, and he had crossed the crater of the courtyard while a god and a boy tore the morning apart because someone had to, and he put his hand on Harry's shoulder the way he had done it once before in the trial hall, and he said the same thing he had said then, the only thing that had ever worked. "Oi, there you are, come back." And on Harry's other side, Hermione, her voice raw, saying, "Don't be certain, you promised me. Whatever's at the end of the thread, Harry, don't be certain." And cash and roll of all the people in the world standing at his back with his wand up against a god, saying nothing at all because the surgeon's whole creed was that you spend only what the moment requires, and the moment did not require words, it required a wall, and he had decided to be one. 3 of them. The ceiling he had asked them to be, on a night that felt like 100 years ago in a borrowed classroom. Not a wall, a hand on the shoulder. The difference matters. Harry stood at the edge of the open door with everything he had ever wanted one step away, and the dark field's eye upon him, and the absence where the old man had been enormous and the power infinite, and he understood the thing that Dumbledore had been afraid of for 100 years and the thing Dumbledore had died hoping, and they were the same thing, they had always been the same thing. Power without a limit is not a gift and it is not a curse. It is a question, and the question is not how high can you climb. Anyone can climb, the question is whether at the top of a staircase with no top, with every reason in the world to take the last step, you can be the first person ever born able to take it who chooses instead to stop. Not because you have a ceiling, because you decide to be one. "No," Harry said to the door, to the field, to the pure and reasonable wanting, to the system that had never once told him to stop. "Not that way, he did it that way, I'm not him." And he stepped back from the door. The field's eye held on him a moment longer, ancient and patient and unjudging, the way a tide holds on a stone, and then finding the door closing, finding the one thing that could have opened it, choosing not to, it rolled the slow rest of the way back over and closed the eye, and went down again into the long sleep it had slept since before the accord, and the cold went out of the morning, and the world was only the world again, ruined and grieving and saved. Harry turned back to Voldemort with the door shut behind him and the staircase still under him. No limit, but climbed at his own pace, by his own choosing, one step at a time, and he was done taking pieces, and he was done climbing toward a wall because he understood, finally, the last thing Roll had never quite managed to teach him, which was that you do not beat a finished thing by becoming infinite. You beat it by being better in the one exchange that matters than a thing that cannot change. There were 2 anchors left, the last 2, and Harry did not pull them. He had learned the killing curse on the first exchange, and the system had told him he would not need it. He did not use it. That was the choice that finished the year, the choice that made him the answer to Dumbledore's fear instead of the proof of it, the choice that the cage had never once imagined because the cage could not conceive of a thing without a limit declining to use it. He fought Voldemort the way Roll had taught him, with the scalpel spending only what each exchange required, and Voldemort at 14,000 was still vast, still deadly, still the most powerful natural duelist who had ever lived, bolted to the wreck of a scaffold, but Voldemort was finished, and Harry was not, and Harry had stopped trying to climb over the wall and started simply to outduel the thing on top of it. He had every spell Voldemort had thrown all morning, learned on the way past, and he had a year of Roll's economy, and he had the thing Voldemort had never once had in 50 years of taking, which was 3 people standing at his back who needed nothing from him but that he come home, and a thing fighting for that beats a thing fighting for itself in the end, in the exchange that matters every time. It was the best dueling of Harry's life, and it looked, to the few who could follow it at all, like the calmest. Where the first minutes had been cataclysm, sky-tearing and stone vaporizing, the end was almost quiet, 2 wizards in a ruined courtyard, one of them spending everything he had left and the other spending exactly and only what each exchange required. Voldemort at 14,000 threw the whole weight of his diminished hoard into openings that were not there, and Harry closed each one with a single economical motion, a shield precisely placed, a step precisely timed, the killing curse he had learned and would not use sitting unspent in him the entire time, a door he had chosen to keep shut. He gave Voldemort back his own arsenal, every cruelty learned on the way past but pared down, made clean, used the way roll used a wand, and the most powerful natural duelist who had ever lived found himself losing exchange after exchange to his own spells fought better than he had ever bothered to fight them, because he had never once in 50 years needed to be efficient, and Harry had needed nothing else. He took Voldemort apart the way Voldemort had taken the world apart, a piece at a time, except that Harry's pieces were the wasted motions and the cruel habits and the 50 years of certainty. And when the wall finally cracked, it cracked the way Draco's had, the way Bellatrix's had, the way every finished thing cracks when it meets a thing that is still becoming. All at once, completely, with the particular disbelief of a creature discovering that the top of the only ladder there is was never the top at all. The two surviving anchors meant Voldemort's body did not die. It fell, hollowed and finite and beaten, the white wand spinning away across the crater, the serpentine face for the first and last time wearing the expression of an orphan who had looked at a wall once long ago and chosen wrong. And Harry caught the white wand out of the air the way he had caught Draco's and Bellatrix's, and he stood over the largest finished thing in the world, now merely a man, now merely the wreck of one, and he did not kill him, because the Order would find the last two anchors now that there were only two, and unmake them, and then the body would die on its own, finite at last, mortal at last. And there was no glory worth taking in finishing by his own hand a thing that had spent its whole life proving that finishing things by your own hand is what you do instead of growing. You could have ascended, Voldemort said from the ground, hollowed, almost wondering, the last words Harry would ever hear him speak. I felt you reach the door. You could have been a god. Why did you stop? I would never have stopped. No one who could reach it would ever stop. I know, Harry said. That's the difference between us. You think no limit means you have to take every step. I worked out it means you finally get to choose which ones. He looked down at the ruin of the most frightened wizard who had ever lived. You spent 50 years escaping a cage by becoming a monster. I spent a year learning I was born without one, and the only thing it taught me worth keeping is that a wall you choose is not a cage. It's just a place you decided to stand. He turned away. You never decided anything. You only ever ran. That's why you lost to a 4. He walked back across the crater to where the three of them stood, and for a moment none of them said anything because nothing fit the size of it. The morning had gone very quiet. The bruise had drained out of the sky and an ordinary gray dawn was coming up over the lake, indifferent the way dawns are to everything that had happened beneath it. Somewhere in the ruined castle a child was crying and being comforted. Somewhere the surviving Death Eaters were being bound. And in the crater where the front courtyard of Hogwarts had stood, a boy of 15 held the white wand of the most feared wizard in the world in a hand he could not unclench, with the body of the only adult who had ever stood beside him cooling 20 feet away, and discovered that winning did not feel the way the histories promised. It felt like being very tired and very young and very glad of the three people standing close enough to lean on. Hermione took the white wand out of his fingers, gently, because they had locked around it and he had not noticed. Ron put an arm across the same shoulders he had reached for at the edge of the door and said nothing, because there was nothing to say and he had always known exactly when nothing was the right thing to say. Cash and Roll stood a little apart, keeping watch by old habit, guarding a door that no longer had anything behind it, because standing guard was the only way he knew how to grieve. They buried Albus Dumbledore on the grounds, by the lake, in white marble, and the whole school came, and London came, and a great many people who had never met him came, and Harry stood at the front with Ron and Hermione and Cash and Roll, and did not give them the face because he had learned, finally, that there were people you did not have to perform grief for because they were grieving the same thing beside you. The index office never rebuilt the gauge. There was talk of it for a while, the bureaucratic instinct to measure being hard to kill, but the talk came to nothing, because the central fact of the gauge, the thing it had measured for 400 years, had been a lie, and you cannot rebuild an instrument once everyone has watched it crack down one flank trying to measure a boy it called nothing. The standing still existed on its slab of black slate in the entrance hall, but it meant less now, the way a map means less once everyone has seen the edge of it and walked past, and the wagging little arrow that had once pointed at the bottom of it was gone, and nobody refreshed it. And in time the slate was quietly taken down, and the wall behind it turned out to have been a perfectly ordinary wall all along. The wider world took longer to understand what had happened than the school did, and never entirely managed it. The Ministry announced the fall of the Dark Lord and was believed, because that part was simple, and people wanted to believe it. The other part, the part about a boy with no ceiling, the part about an instrument that had measured every wizard in Britain for 400 years cracking apart because it met a thing it could not hold, that part the Ministry did not announce, because the Ministry did not know what to do with it, and a government that does not know what to do with a fact has a long tradition of deciding the fact was a rumor. But the keepers of the threshold accord knew. There were fewer of them now with Dumbledore gone, and the ones who remained came quietly to Hogwarts in the weeks after, gray, careful people who had spent their whole lives certain that the cage was a mercy, and they looked at Harry the way the senior index official had looked at her empty clipboard, and then they went away again without doing anything because there was nothing to be done. The accord still held for everyone else. the lid was still on the dark field. It was only that there existed now in the world one wizard for whom the lid had never been there at all, who had stood at the open door of the very thing the accord was built to contain and chosen, of his own will, to close it from the inside. And the keepers who had spent their lives believing that only a wall could keep that door shut were left to make their slow, uneasy peace with a stranger possibility, that a choice could do it too, and that perhaps the whole time, under the wall and the gauge and the 400 years of careful measurement, a choice had been the only thing that ever truly could. Harry Potter never sat another reading. There was no instrument left to read him, and no number that would have meant anything if there had been, and the school stopped trying fairly quickly to find a word for what he was, and settled in the end on the simplest one available, which was his name. He went back to classes. He failed deliberately and convincingly to be remarkable in most of them, because he had learned the use of being underestimated and saw no reason to give up a thing that had served him so well. He let McGonagall catch him at it exactly once, and she looked at his neat, unremarkable transfiguration and then at him, over the square frames, and said, "Curious," and he said, "I've decided how much of it to do, Professor," and she almost smiled and did not report it, and that was the closest the two of them ever came to discussing the morning the sky changed color. Cassian Roll came to find him once in the week after in the dueling theory aisle of the library where they had first spoken, and stood at the end of it the way he always had, and for a while neither of them said anything, which between the two of them was a whole conversation. "I have been thinking about what I am for now," Roll said at last. "I spent my life being the best duelist in this school. I was very good at it. And then I watched you stop one step short of becoming a god because a Weasley put a hand on your shoulder, and I find the title no longer interests me the way it did." He considered Harry with the flat, assessing stillness that had no cold left in it. "I have decided I should like to teach, not the strong. The strong have always had teachers. The ones at the bottom of the board, the fours, the ones everyone has already finished deciding about. I think someone should find out what is small and what has only not yet been measured, and I think I am the one duelist alive who knows now that those are not the same thing." He turned to go, and the last of it came over his shoulder the way it always had. "You taught me that. It is the only duel you ever won against me, and you won it without throwing a single spell." He paused. "Come up the tree some time, Potter. I should still like to meet whatever you actually are." He left, and Harry stood a moment in the dueling theory aisle and understood that the inversion he had set off on a dais a year ago had not stopped at his own name. It was still moving quietly through the whole idea of the school, the slow overturning of 4 centuries of one comfortable lie, and it would go on long after the talk of him had faded, which suited him exactly, because he had never wanted to be the point. He had only ever wanted to find out how far he could walk. On the last night of the term he went up to the 7th floor, to the corridor where it had started, the blank wall, the tapestry of a man teaching trolls to dance, the painted dancer long since recovered from the night a light had blinded him. He stood where he had sat the first night, the night a voice had said the only kind thing anyone had ever said to him, and he reached, in the place behind his sternum, for the thing that had counted every step of the climb and never once told him to stop. "Well, there," he asked. "Still here," said the system. Anything left to count? There was a pause, the kind the system took only when it was deciding how true to be, which had always been very. There is always something left to count. That is what no ceiling means. The staircase did not end when he did. It does not end. It will never end for the whole of your life, and you will climb it or not, at your own pace, by your own choosing, one step at a time, for as long as you live. You asked me on the first night how high it goes. I told you I meant IT without qualification. I still do. But you have learned the thing I was not built to teach you, and the only thing worth knowing about a staircase with no top, which is that the point was never the top. The point was that it was yours." Harry stood in the dark corridor a while longer, the only ceiling at Hogwarts he had ever had any chance of reaching far above his head, no nearer than it had ever been and no further, and then he went down to the common room, where Ron was setting up a chessboard and Hermione was already arguing about the rules and a fire was burning low and warm, and he sat down among the people who had decided to be his ceiling, and let himself, for the first time in a long time, simply stop climbing. Because he had somewhere he wanted to be, and it was right there, and it had a top, and he had chosen it on purpose, and that in the end was the whole of what the voice had given him on the first night, not the absence of a limit, but the freedom at last to pick his own. Chapter 7 End.